All right, welcome once again to the Theology Experience, where my goal is to experience theology through long form, open dialogue. I'm your host, Tre Brickley, and today we are experiencing theology with Sean Griffin. Sean is a husband, a father, and the creator of the Kingdom in Context YouTube channel and community, and the companion app where their motto is Context Creates Comprehension. Sean is also the author of First Enoch, a contextual study guide of Scripture. Sean, welcome. I'm very glad to have you.
Hey, Trey, thanks for having me on. I look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Well, as you know, the first bit of conversation I want to have with you is just to get to know you a little bit more and your story, your journey, how, your relation to theology and the Bible started, what the journey's been like, where you are now, and some of those details. So take it away. Tell me all that you've got to say.
Well, I'll give you the short story. I came to Christ in 1997, July 17th, 1997, on a I-95 in New Jersey highway on the back of a minivan. My father was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. I'd gone to church my life, and I was just 17 years old, depressed, gone through a breakup, and decided that I wanted to. And I know this sounds extremely disrespectful now, but back then, being a 17-year-old, not knowing any better, I thought to myself, all right, I'll give this thing a try. Right. I'll give this relationship with God and Jesus a try. Right. And boy, did he show up.
Mm,
He met me where I was at. And I went through the traditional concept of asking him into my heart kind of thing. No one's like guiding me. No one's leading me.
mm,
I would, some would say that my pain at the time was leading me to get on my emotional knees before the Father, and cry out to God. But so he showed up. I felt
mm,
like he dropped the Holy Spirit in me. I felt like someone poured a bucket of warm water on me. It
mm.
was it was a surreal feeling, you know. And I'm we're on like a little family vacation. I'm sitting in the back of the minivan, right? And so I didn't even tell my father and my stepmother and my sister and anyone else in the van. I didn't tell anybody what's going on.
Mm.
You know, I'm just back there having a moment with God, just completely by myself.
Like Ezekiel in his house, having that vision.
Yeah. And I saw in the back of the back seat cargo netting, behind the seats in the minivan there, I saw my stepmother's woman's devotional Bible. And
Mm,
because I just immediately thought to myself after I had this little emotional experience of feeling like someone poured warm water on me. I finished my prayer, crying out to him, asking him to come in my heart, change me. And, what I really prayed though was, I want to know you. I've grown up in church. I've seen people that seem to be fake in this concept of walking out life as a Christian,
mm,
and I want to do it for real. I want to
mm.
know what makes you tick, and that was kind of the gist of my prayer.
Yeah.
And I immediately just had this desire to read the Bible, and so I grabbed my stepmother's woman's devotional Bible, and for the journey that we were driving, I read both there and back. I read two books in the Old Testament, two in the Gospels,
Mm,
and then when I got back home, I believe I read the Old Testament books. I believe it was Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I want to say Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and then it was, I think, Matthew and Luke. Um, and then when I got back home, I jumped into James and First John, and then I just, I never stopped after that.
mm.
And so I think I jokingly called myself a word nerd
Yes.
because I loved to read growing up, and now I've had this amazing book that suddenly seemed relevant to me that I hadn't read much previously, and it was just, this incredible book that every time I read it, I got something new and unique
Mm,
out of it, and I was like, what is this book? I
mm,
have books that I'd read previously growing up. I'd read multiple times, different types of books that I was interested in, and they're great because they're classics. You read them, you like them, you read them again, but you're never surprised, right? Because you've read it, the
mm,
story. It just, you're just reading it out of comfort, really. You're not reading it to explore or learn what's this new storyline, who are these new characters. But man, going through the Bible for the first time as a young man, early on in my walk, it was just like I felt like I was just, an ancient adventurer tiptoeing through the
mm.
cave of exploration, of just like, what is this amazing thing? And like every time I read it for years and years and years, just entirely, um, new concepts just popping out to me as far as relevancy and
Mm.
um, something that was helpful to my walk or pertinent to my walk. Something I felt was powerful and life changing. And the way my mind works, I would always quickly see that it's making sense with the world around me. Right? It was
Mm.
telling me what I was looking at in this life. So when I was going to college and losing friends and relationships and struggles and all this kind of stuff, and I would read in the scriptures things that pertained to those struggles and those witnesses and those observations, and it just continually reinforced itself as a book of wisdom and truth.
Mm.
And I was like, no wonder this is a book that is the most controversial yet also best-selling book in the world. No
Mm.
wonder. Did you know that the Bible sells more copies every year? So much so it sells more copies than a number one best-selling book every year, that the New York Times doesn't even put it on the best-selling list because
Wow.
it would just dwarf any of the other best-selling books. So they don't even put it on the list anymore. Apparently they used to put it on the list like 30, 40 years ago, but then they stopped because it was silly. It was almost like it's a different category, right? So, but yeah, the Bible is the number one best-selling book in the world every year. And as someone that loved books and amateur author and loved to write, I thought to myself, that's impressive. Like people are continuing to buy this book all over the world.
Mm.
It's banned in 52 countries. It's what is this?
Wow.
Like
Yeah,
I
there's
feel
something
like
significant about it.
yeah. And why? How come every time I read it, I get something new out of it? It still
Mm.
speaks to me every single time. And that's no other book in the world that I've found like that.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was something that continued to solidify my faith. Now, as a young man, I struggled with all kinds of sin, still
Mm.
trying to disciple and sanctify and trying to get better at things. And just learning where my weaknesses were took a while as well. And I think this is a part of our sanctification and discipleship that I wish that I had been a part of a church that focused on discipleship at that time,
Mm.
to give me more of a grounding into, hey, you will have struggles in these areas, or you may already. Here's how you can, be aware of what these are. Here's how now
Right.
I was going to like, word of faith churches
Mm.
where I lived at the time. And so they were so focused on the prosperity gospel and come get your miraculous healing. And, just it wasn't based on discipleship. It was, get excited at praise and worship, get excited about this offering, get excited about this world evangelism message where we're going to go take, miraculous healing and the prosperity gospel to other nations. And it took me a while to really grasp what I was looking at in those churches
Mm.
and why it wasn't productive, especially
Mm.
for me. And I was meanwhile simultaneously going through my own journey of trying to figure out, what is this life I walk with Christ? What does this mean? And of course, I was reading the Bible the whole time, but of course I was never hearing the things I was reading in the Bible be continually be reaffirmed at these churches and from these pastors in this vein of teaching. And I continually had this simultaneously. I had, it's like three things happening simultaneously as a young, in my early 20s. I was struggling with sin, locating the sin, trying to root it out of my life.
Mm.
Um, Simultaneously going to churches and hearing how God wants the best for you, your best life now. The mind is a battlefield, this Joyce Meyer's new age, new speak philosophy. Like, and it was very interesting, trying to be hyped up and being continually recharged
Mm.
from a more of a inspirational type
Yeah.
message from
Yeah.
churches, not really being rooted and grounded in the love of Christ because I was doing his commandments. Because I
Mm.
wasn't being pointed to, even though I was reading about him, and I'd read First John many times. I'd read the Old Testament. I'd read, Matthew. I'm reading how Christ is exemplifying the commandments, but yet it hadn't clicked for me yet as far as like this is practical discipleship. So simultaneously, I'm trying to work out my own salvation with fear and trembling, struggling with my own sins, getting
Mm.
hyped up by very shallow, prosperity gospel, hyped up inspirational messages. But then all the while, the third thing that was happening simultaneously was a growing suspicion or a growing knot in my stomach, a growing feeling that something was off.
Mm.
Right.
Mhm.
And that continued to grow and grow. And then it became, it wasn't until I was about 34 then I realized what that nagging suspicion was,
Mm.
what was off about what I was witnessing at this church culture versus my personal walk. And it was the lack of direction to discipleship, specifically under the instruction of God's commandments.
Mm.
And so when I came into what many people will call Torah observance, I just say I am a disciple of Jesus Christ and keep the commandments of God. But I know I get labeled as a Torah observant person.
Of course.
But when I came into that understanding, I mean, it was just like suddenly the Bible was making that much more sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Suddenly the Bible was
exactly.
so much more relevant. Suddenly there was more of the Bible that I felt was relevant to me, because most of these churches are teaching, oh, we're in the New Testament, you're New Covenant only. So just start with Matthew and read everything from right of Matthew, and anything left of Matthew back to Genesis is good. I mean, it can be good for teaching examples maybe, but it's really doesn't apply to you, and so when I came into the realization that all of it applied to me and all of it's still relevant and all of it is the wisdom of God for our life, um, the Bible just became that much more important to me, that much
Mm.
more explosive in its meaning and relevance in my life, and that much more fascinating. Because here I started to quickly notice that, oh my goodness, there's I had heard preachers giving their prosperity gospel messages often quote the Malachi passage where Yahweh's like, I'm Yahweh, I change not, right? He is faithful. He did it for Abraham. He can do it for you, right? Because he says, I'm Yahweh, I change not. Okay, cool. But then he also says, his ordinances, statutes, commandments
Mm.
are eternal and everlasting.
Mm.
And I'm like, he said he changes not. So then I
Exactly.
started to really kind of put it together like, oh, wait a minute here. Um, I think I've been sold. I think I've been sold a poor understanding of the Bible. And, I noticed there was a difference between what was being preached from the pulpits versus like what, the slightly deeper depths you may experience in a Sunday school or like a men's group setting you would meet during the week and study the Bible together. And I was involved in all those as well. Um, and so I was wanting more depth as much as possible. Right. I just wanted to know this book. I was fascinated and frustrated with equal proportion that I could have this amazing book that I couldn't, after reading it for, at this point, 17 years, after reading it for 17 years, that I could not competently tell somebody I understand this book.
Mm. Mm.
And that made me feel ridiculous. Right. I mean, I read Tolstoy, I read Shakespeare, I read Dickens, I could read the advanced literature. I wrote my own books and stories. Like I feel like even as a writer, I was like offended within myself. Like, are you this dumb, Sean? How can you continue to be reading
Hmm.
this book for 17 years and you still you like, if I'm being honest with myself, I still could not competently and with 100% assurance go to someone and say, I can explain every part of this book to you.
Hmm.
And I thought that was just, it was like this phenomenon in life that I thought was, there's no other book like this, you know? And that's where the first step in actually understanding the book from start to finish was coming into the realization that God does not change. His
Hmm.
commandments are still relevant. It is his behavior. It is his personal behavior. It's his behavior. This is the part I think even sometimes in the Torah
Yeah.
crowd, a lot of people disagree with, or they just, they've still brought their denominational baggage in from other groups into the Torah observant communities.
Hmm.
And they still struggle with this idea that the commandments given to Israel weren't just arbitrary for that day. Sure, there's a couple little details that may be circumstantial to
Hmm.
whatever's going on, and but the general concept of the commandments of the covenant, he says he gave his ways and deeds to Israel like it's his behavior in heaven. Like
His
this is
ways.
how,
Yeah.
yeah, this
Hmm.
is how he operates. This is how his
Hmm.
his character and personality actually is.
Hmm.
So then I realized, oh, no wonder First John says that's how I know God is to keep his commandments, and that's how I'm known by God is to keep his commandments,
Mm.
because I'm literally practicing the same behavior that he exists in.
Right. The key
And
concept there being imitation, right?
yeah,
Walking as he walks.
yeah, and that's why in Matthew 7, Christ will tell some, "Depart from me, you people of wickedness, because I've never knew you." Right?
Mm.
Because they were doing lawlessness. They're not doing the ways of the Father, which is the same behavior of the Son,
Hmm.
but they're doing different behaviors. So it's like if you and I were roommates, Trey, we, if we just had completely different lives, we probably wouldn't have a close bond as friends, right? We'd just be
Mm,
roommates, passing and coming and go as our schedules allowed, and maybe see each other and talk a little bit. But ultimately, we didn't really share any depth of bond because you had a completely different view on life and
right.
completely different behaviors. And so it's that simple, like it's that
Mm.
real, it's that relatable.
Seems like the concept that's picked up on in the early chapters of Genesis is really relevant here. Walking with God, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You see in the garden story that it talks about God walking in the garden. Presumably,
Mm-hmm.
some have kind of speculated about what exactly that means. Was he walking with Adam and Eve on a consistent basis? You can kind of imagine exactly what's going on there. But then the theme echoes later throughout Genesis, where it talks about Enoch who walked with God
Mm-hmm.
and Noah who walked with God,
Yeah.
and the imitation of God, the walking in His ways, is exactly you're riffing on here.
Yeah. So if you're not doing his ways, that means you're doing things that aren't wise,
Mm,
things that aren't righteous, things that aren't life giving. Instead, they're destructive and death giving.
yeah.
And so therefore, it's hard for him to to fellowship with you. It's hard for you to fellowship with him. It's hard for you to relate to him
Mm,
because you to have a to be of what they would call to be of two minds is to have the thoughts to know how God expects and how God behaves, and then you to feign that behavior, but really not be about that behavior, right?
mm,
Or so it's this is where I can't remember the passage. I want to say it's in um, I can't remember the passage right now. I don't know if it's in um, it's not in Nahum, but there's a passage where it talks about God would give us singleness of heart.
mm,
And it's also in the Testament. I think it's in the Testament of Asher, but it's the Testament of 12 patriarchs as well. It talks about having singleness of heart, and
mm.
that's what he desires from us. Um, not that we would be, tossed by every wind of doctrine, not that they would be, um, obviously not like the Pharisees, right? Not claiming to be
Right.
bastions of God's word and defenders of God's life, but yet at the same time, truly ignoring it and just making up your own stuff, right? And
Exactly.
that's the part where you do see that still happening today, even in
Mm,
Christian churches,
hmm.
Protestant denominations especially. But I try to be merciful as far as because I was there, I was in it, I was in that mire of confusion and didn't know a way out until the Father showed me a way out, right? And I feel like I was just as much saved during those years as I was when I came to Torah observance. But this is just a better, deeper walk with him because I knew actually what
Mm.
discipleship was at this point, right?
Yeah, like with Apollos, was that his name? Whom Asilla and I forget their names. I'm gonna botch them, but in Acts where it talks about the one who was shown the way of God more perfectly.
Yeah, it's
Right.
Aquila and Priscilla. They saw
Yeah,
this guy in Alexandria in Acts 18, Apollos, and he was powerfully refuting the Jews in public debate. And they were impressed with him, but then they took him aside privately to show him the way of God more accurately.
exactly.
And it says that he was preaching, he had known the baptism of John and was preaching about Christ, but
Mm,
yet he just he wasn't hanging out with the disciples in Judea, and this was Acts 18, so we're talking like probably AD 61, 62 maybe. And
mm,
so this is many decades after Christ ascended to heaven, and here the message of Christ has already gotten to people in Alexandria, Egypt, and they're already got their own evangelists out there talking about Christ.
right.
But yet here comes Aquila and Priscilla, who did know the apostles and
Mm.
said, oh man, this we like what this guy's doing, but let's just fine tune him a little bit.
Yeah, he was like the similar to, not exactly the same, but where Paul in Romans chapter 10 talks about those who have zeal but without knowledge, right? And he even had some knowledge. He just didn't have all of the important knowledge he needed to have. And so I think that the salient point, and I really like the way that you're characterizing this, is that we need to be merciful toward those with whom we have theological disagreements, even similar to
Yeah.
the groups that we came from, because we were there. We understand what it's like to be captured by these ideas that we have now come to see are false. So what we need to do is act that the way that with the spirit and the attitude of Aquila and Priscilla here, which is, hey, there's something good about you guys. There is truth here, but there's more. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it could also be, you know, um, the same example of Peter still struggling with the Judaism that was in him,
Mm, mm,
like in Acts chapter 10,
yeah.
you know, or even whatever encounter he and Paul had that's being repeated in Galatians 2,
Hmm.
where Paul was like, look, even though he's considered to be a pillar, I was not afraid to go call him out
Right.
because, he was doing something that was contrary to the gospel. And he was falling back into that rabbinic segregation mentality of like, oh, well,
Exactly.
they're converts, but they're just proselytes. They're not really blood-born Abraham descendants. And so they have a totally different law and I'm going to treat them
Mm.
separately. And Peter had to have an angelic visitation to the very person he was treating biasly before he learned. So the
Yeah.
angel, that's the most ironic part to me. In Acts 10, the angel shows up to Cornelius, right?
Mm, mm.
Like the guy that Peter was going to have to learn. Now he's just like you. He's in the covenant now with you, just like you are, man.
Oh,
Just
wow. Yeah.
because, what I'm saying? So that very concept of Cornelius being like, yeah, I had an angel show up telling me that I'm supposed to come talk with you. And then I can only imagine Peter being like, yeah, that's awesome, bro. Like, I wonder if the thought was going through his head, like, the angel could have just shown up to me and we could have
Right.
avoided all this. But no, he was like going to learn a lesson forever at this point, right? Which I seem to, for my studies, I found out that what Peter was abiding by was something that's in the Mishnah that's called set table. And it's like, even if converts came in, if they weren't a part of bloodborne Israel, then they were treated differently.
Mm.
And you couldn't even eat with them, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because the rabbis feared that they would have some sort of lingering idolatry that might rub off on you. And
Yeah.
so they didn't want you to eat with the Gentile converts. And so, but that's not how God views it, right? God
No.
says there's one law in Israel, native or foreign born. You want to worship Yahweh, the God of Israel. You want to do the commandments of the covenant. You're just as now much of Israel as Peter was, right?
Exactly.
So,
And that's why the lesson that Peter learned, he states it explicitly. He says, I now know that God is no respecter of persons. In other words, he does not distinguish arbitrarily between the nations, even with respect to Israel, but rather um, anyone from among the nations who practices righteousness, who fears him and practices righteousness, is acceptable to him. Right? That's the
yeah,
lesson. Not, oh, by the way, the lesson is not, so now it's okay to eat pork.
that's right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, the longer I studied that concept and became more familiar with God's ways and his laws, the more the story of Jonah made sense to me.
Hmm.
Because here's Jonah, prophet of Israel, being sent to not Israel,
Oh, yes. Right.
right? And he doesn't want them to.
He
He
doesn't want
views
him
them
to
as the
repent.
enemy. He doesn't want them to repent, and then they do.
Oh,
And
wow.
from king down to beast, everyone sackcloths up, and everyone repents of their evil deeds. Jonah chapter 3, and then
And he's still bitter.
Jonah's mad that
He's
that
still
he
bitter
knew
about that.
this would happen, right?
Wow.
Because he knew like God will accept them, and he didn't want God to accept them. And this is the part where God then has to chastise Jonah, but um, we don't hear much after Jonah after that part. But the only follow up thought even to that whole story you see in the book of Tobit, which is Tobit talks about at the end of Tobit, I think it's chapter 13 or 14, about how Tobit, already having gone into Assyria, into exile, into Ecbatana, he had heard about Jonah previously, decades before, having shown up, and how um, Tobit was still wanting the judgment to come on Assyria.
Mm,
And so, even though it was stayed for 100 years, now at the end of Tobit's life, it was coming down to Syria, and
mm.
Tobit was happy about it. so,
Interesting. I
so,
didn't know that.
yeah,
And yeah, I didn't know about that connection to Tobit. And also the thematic relevance of the story of Jonah. That's a new thought to me. I appreciate that. Yeah, that seems
yeah,
exactly on par with what's going on with Peter.
yeah. Unfortunately, in the modern church today, especially um, it's in all modern branches of Christianity today, they hold a what I call a version of dispensation theology. That they won't call it this. I know 1850s, the official dispensation came out with the charts and but the general concept of dispensation is that God treats people differently in different ages, right? He has different standards of expectation for different people groups in different ages of time.
Hmm.
And I've been saying for a long time that Judaism was the first dispensationalists. They're the ones that have been claiming we're the people that were given the law and the prophets, and everyone else is not special. Everyone else, they can have the Noahide laws, but we get the fullness of the commandments of the covenant.
Mm.
I mean, like, how is that not the first dispensation? Like, because dispensation just assumes God is treating people with different weights and measures, that God is, showing partiality, right? That he's expecting a higher level of obedience from one person than the other, and that there's
Hmm.
somehow is going to be different applications of covenant reward, right, to different people groups, and that somehow they just completely ignore the idea that, 3 times in Exodus, Genesis through Deuteronomy, we see this. There's one law for the native or the foreign born, right? So they ignore all that, and so do modern Orthodox Catholic and Protestant churches. They ignore all that, and they say, well, many of them fall into church replacement theology,
Mm.
supersessionism, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll fall into, which I think is just another form of dispensation mindset
Hmm.
of them saying, we're different now. It's a different time, the age of grace, the new covenant, and
The
therefore
church age.
God deals with us differently.
Hmm.
We don't have to follow the law. We can just follow Jesus. And you're like, well, what? What is okay? Okay, so thank you for the nondescript bumper sticker. Thank you for the very, very short billboard. I appreciate that. But like, what does that even mean? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in my experience, coming out of charismatic, non denominational, word of faith type churches, following Jesus was wild. Like, the application of following Jesus meant maybe you wake up that day and pray what you should wear. Let Jesus tell you what color shirt and pants you should pick out of your drawers that day, right?
Hmm.
Look, I'm not saying we can't be led by the Holy Spirit in even the most minute ways. I'm just saying it
Yeah, as far as
since
what
they
it means to walk as
yeah
he walked, right? What does that actually mean?
since they
Right.
couldn't fall back on the actual instructions in the Bible to be like, well,
Mm.
here's how Jesus walked. He kept the commandments of God, and he taught
Mm.
us to
Mm.
commit the commandments of God, and that you apply to your life, right? As superficially and as deep as you can, instead of understanding all those principles of wisdom from the creator. It became more of, all right, well, let the Holy Spirit lead you. um you know I kid you not, Trey, I knew a guy when I was 21 that tried to tell me, like, he came over to my apartment one night and he was trying to tell me that he had just had the wildest experience, that he just drove halfway through his town, because he lived, like, I lived in a large city, he lived in a smaller little town, like, which adjacent to the city, and that he had driven into the large city to come see me. And he had tried to tell me that he had driven halfway through that small town to leave to come to me with his eyes closed, letting the Holy Spirit tell him when to turn left and right.
Okay. Interesting.
And I'm like, all right, man. Look, praise God you're alive. Like, that's what I told him. I'm like, so even when I was in the thick of trying to, do what I felt like these churches were teaching me to do, right? I still felt there's something seriously not
Right.
stable. There's something not that doesn't feel like a good foundation here, you know.
That's a good point.
Now,
Yeah.
at the same time, that guy performed an exorcism on somebody.
Hmm.
So I used to joke with him and I would say, man, it's like, you need to read your Bible more, but I need to have more faith like you in the way
Hmm.
that you do.
Hmm.
Right. I was like, because you got all the faith, but you don't have a clue what this book says. And I think that's a problem. I was like, and I'm voraciously studying this book, but I would like to have more of your unrestrained faith from time to time. And
Hmm.
so um, I went through a period of my life where I asked God, hey, can I have some of that? What would that look like? Right.
Hmm.
And he gave it to me. And not the drive with your eyes closed thing, but like what I would see in the scriptures is actual gifts of the Spirit. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even into the concepts of like word of knowledge, to where um, I would be, I mean, I'm going to try to express this as quickly as possible, but as accurately as possible, just so I don't sound like a crazy person. But basically, I started to after making that prayer, I
Mm-hmm.
started feeling like I was hearing in my heart and my mind, um, you know, that person, go pray for this person about this,
Hmm.
XYZ, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, one time I was walking through my apartment parking lot, just going to my car one day, about to go to work, and this woman was walking to her car right over, the other over there on the other way, and I just heard, "Go pray for her. Her son's name is Michael." That's all I heard. And I was like, thinking to myself, I should have left the house earlier so that I had more time to do this and get to work on time. But so then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to test this, right? I'm going to test. Am I really hearing from God? I've never seen this woman before. She's like down the way in the parking lot. So we didn't live in the buildings next to each other. So like, if this doesn't turn out well, so I can just be like, oh, I'm sorry. I just want to pray for you. Have a good day. And then she'll never see me again. Right. Um, but I walked up to this lady as she's getting into her car, which already seems like a red flag,
Yeah, that's a
right?
little
I mean, you
weird.
just and and I was like, hey, I'm sorry to bother you. I just want to ask you real quick. And she clearly looked kind of startled, She's like, what do you need? I'm like,
Naturally, yeah.
I just want to ask you real quick. I was like, hey, I was told to pray for you. Um, do you, I was told to specifically to pray for your son, Michael. And this lady went like deathly white. She was like, how do you know me? How do you know my son?
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't. I just, I felt like God told me to pray for you and to pray for your son. And then she starts crying because her son was just diagnosed with leukemia.
Wow.
And his name was Michael.
Wow.
So this was freaking me out. Like I'm trying to, this surreal moment I'm trying to process, as well as like, what is this? Like this is, and so I pray for her, and I told her, well, I guess he's going to be okay because I was sent to pray for you and God told me his name. And she's like, what? She's like, she's still trying to grasp what's happening. And she's also quickly emotional.
Hmm.
And that was it. And I said, okay, well, have a good day. I got to go. And I just walked back down the parking lot, got in my car, went to work. And that started happening frequently
Hmm.
during this time in my life. I was 22 years old, and it started happening frequently, and I didn't know how to handle it, right?
Hmm.
Because I would be at work, and the person I'd be working next to, I would just, that same feeling would come over me, and I would hear in my head, here is a bad, it's hard to describe it. It's not like an audible
Right.
voice.
Right.
It's like a sense of knowing, right?
It's like a thought almost.
Yeah, but it's a thought that is not mine,
Yeah, it
right?
just
That's
shows up.
So this happened multiple times. I would just be encountering all regular life, and
Hmm.
um, it happened, over 20 times, and then it got to the point where it was happening so frequently that I just asked God, I'm not ready for this, and can you please just, can you turn this down? You know, and I was thinking like a, knob on a, like you're turning another knob on the radio, just turn it down, please. I can't handle this
Hmm.
because it was some of the stuff that I was and these thoughts that I would have about these people, and I tested it with more than just that lady, right? I
Hmm.
tested it multiple times to the point where I wanted to be sure that I knew what was happening, right? And I'm thinking to myself scriptural examples because that's where my mind always goes. I'm like, all right,
Hmm.
what's the scriptural foundation for something like this? And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, how did Nathan know when David took Bathsheba? How did he know about all that?
Yeah, God told him.
Yeah, like how does, you know, like in Ezekiel, Ezekiel is actually taken from exile back into Jerusalem, and in a spiritual manner, he's shown the corruption and the false god worship in the temple, and why it's about to be destroyed and everything, and like that would have been, that's like a supernatural moment that he didn't
Yeah,
shouldn't have had that information to know.
right.
So I was like, all right, well, there seems to be a precedent of, clearly Christ himself exemplifies, oh
Exactly.
yeah, it's correct that you say that you're not married. In fact, that you've had 5 husbands and the man you're with now is not your husband. And so like
Yeah,
Christ
or even
also
the
knew.
the examples where he knows the thoughts, right? He knows the thoughts
Yeah.
that people have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, this seems to be a precedent of a gift of the Spirit. And I it's happened with undeniable multitude of times in my life at this point.
Hmm.
But every time it happened, it was like the person that I would pray for or talk to minister to, there was like tremendous emotions that went
Hmm.
along with whatever was going on, right? And I would
Yes.
start to feel all those, right? So that's what was messing me up because I was like, I couldn't focus at my job, you know. I was becoming highly emotional, which wasn't my normal mo. Right, I wasn't normal. I was more stoic all the time. Um, and I just didn't know I didn't know anyone to talk to about this.
Hmm.
I didn't know how to handle this, and with all this evidence that proved itself over and over again, I still was like, God, if you can, you just turn this down, please. And I just can't handle this. And he did.
Hmm.
Never happened
Hon- Honored
again.
your request.
It didn't happen again for 5 years. And it happened again after 5 years because I was going through a divorce, and um, it was a rough time. And I'd ask for, like, yeah, I don't want to get in the nitty gritty because
It's okay.
I don't want to dishonor my son's mother, if I could put it like that.
Sure.
But basically, he gave me some supernatural information that I shouldn't have had, that caused me to realize that this marriage was over, and that she was not going to be continuing with me. And so uh, God used that gifting, if you will, not for her ministry or for the sake of her ministering to her, but for the sake of letting me know, you need to prepare for closure.
Hmm.
You need to prepare. It's over. Like, you need to. It was actually to minister to me when I was like,
Hmm.
whoa, wait a minute. So, like, he turned the use of it around, and it was to actually share, to prepare
Yeah.
me to
Yeah.
get my heart in the right place. And so it was interesting. And after that, I just continued to study the Bible as I always have.
Hmm.
And I feel like, which is why we started our channel, Kingdom in Context. I feel like at this point later in my life, into my 30s, I started really being more focused on trying to understand Scripture so that I can help explain it to people.
Hmm.
That was more my heart.
Yeah.
And that, as opposed to randomly startling people with words of knowledge and miraculous movings of the Spirit, for gifts of the Spirit, for that type of ministry. But I was like, you know what? There may be men out there that are more geared for that,
Hmm.
but I just love talking about the Bible with people. I would love to do that, and I would love to see people get it,
Hmm.
you know. And so
Yeah, you
that's
prefer
where,
that to be the focus of your ministry. Yeah,
yeah, and there is a gift of teaching, and
exactly.
so
Yeah.
and that was what I was passionate about, right? I wasn't passionate about startling people and crying with them every day, right? Strangers that I didn't know, right? So it was, you know, clearly God can use people to do that type of ministry, right? We're hands and feet.
Mm-hmm.
There's different forms of ministry,
Yeah.
and so I asked him in my consistent prayers since I became a Christian, uh, even though I was 17. But when I was about 18 years old, so I've been a Christian for like 6 months. I started this prayer. I don't know what prompted me to start praying this, but I started praying this every day, which is that, God, would you give me knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of your word and of this world, so that I can better relate your word to this world. And that
Mm.
was my prayer every single day as I read the Bible. And in my my 30s, the early to mid 30s, I started to um I guess get more fervent about that type of prayer for some reason, and really
Hmm.
just wanted to know this book inside and out. And that's where I think he led me to the commandments. The
Praise
most
God.
glaring and obvious thing in the book that I'd missed all this time.
Right,
and,
exactly. Once you
and
see it, you can't unsee it type thing. Wait,
yeah.
so your kind of charismatic experience, where you're walking in this frightening, almost surprising gifting that God was working in you, this was before you came to an understanding of the
Oh,
commandments?
oh yeah. Oh
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I was full of bad conclusions during those years, right?
Mm,
I thought the Trinity was real. I thought
mm,
I was, all this new covenant church replacement theology was real. I thought,
mm.
that um I thought a whole bunch of unscriptural things during that time of my life, right?
Which goes
But
to which goes to show a really important point, which is that the Spirit of God can move even in people who have bad theology.
oh yeah,
The Spirit of
yeah.
God is not contained or constrained by your theology, within reason, of course. Which reminds me of that verse, I think, in the Gospels, I forget which one, where Jesus says something to the effect of, "Hey, look, if they're not against us, they're for us." Because there were people who were using the name of Jesus
Mhm.
to work miracles.
Yeah, I
And
think it's in Luke 9. I think
and
like
the, yeah,
38 through 45.
and the apostles were like, "Hey, they're not us. Like, what's going on here?" And Jesus says, "Don't worry about it. It's okay. Like,
Yeah.
if they're not opposing our ministry, if they're not fighting against us, then that's all right. God can still use them."
Yeah. Yeah, and Jesus did not qualify that statement with, "Oh, did you ask him if they believe in the Trinity?" Oh, wait. Oh, Peter, did you stop him and make sure that he repeated the mantra that he said by faith through grace? and not by works. Did you make sure he said that? It's like there's just he did
Exactly.
not need to.
No.
Did he the Westminster Creed? Did he repeat the Westminster Creed to you? Did he repeat the Nicene Creed to you? No. He was just a dude out there with faith. He'd heard the message of Jesus, and he goes out to repeat it.
Exactly.
Like the faith
Exactly.
of a child. You know,
Right.
like my son who's 2 years old. He repeats everything I say.
Mm. He doesn't
He's like,
necessarily understand it all.
no, but he doesn't have to, because
Exactly.
if I say, hey, walk past all the dangerous things in the garage and go to the backyard so we can play. When he does that, he avoids all the danger and goes and enjoys playing in the backyard,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
he'll say outside play, and then he goes to the grass in the backyard and plays, and that, like, that's all that we have to do as well. We just have to just repeat the
Mm.
words of what he's told us.
Mm.
Just keep it simple, stupid is what my track coach used to say. It's the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid.
Yes. Yes.
And but here are the disciples in that moment trying to overcomplicate it, right? They're like, oh, we saw this other dude out there having all these results as well. And that, to me, that's a wonderful little example. Just like I'm glad you brought that up, because to me it ties back to what I was mentioning with Jonah. So the disciples see, while they're in the thick of walking around ministering with Jesus, the disciples see another person going out, speaking the name of Yeshua and doing ministry. And the disciples are like, whoa, he's not part of our clique. What's going on here?
Mm.
Like if I could, speak in meta terms here, the disciples are like, the spotlight of this gospel is on us. Who's this guy?
Mm.
Like we're with the prime alpha character here in this story. Who's this circumstantial guy over here that's like, how does he know? He's just he's just grifting off our aura, right?
Mm.
But actually, Christ is like, no, leave him alone. He's doing good, right? You never hear anything else about this person.
Yeah, we don't know who he is.
They'll know who he is. In the same way, what happens to all those people that repented in Assyria and Nineveh?
Mm. Yeah.
So we see in the book of Tobit, you see that there was a bad king when Tobit went into exile, but then that there was heavy persecution in Assyria where people were being killed left and right, that were a part of the exiles of Israel. But then that slowed down and stopped after they had a transition of a king. And then I think his name is Akira. I know that sounds like a Japanese anime, but I can't remember his name, but it was Tobit's nephew. He basically got a counselor position in the court of the new king, and he
Like
was a
Daniel.
believer. Yeah, it's very much
Yeah.
a northern version of the southern story of Daniel and the three Hebrews. Like, it's the very concept of, like, up in the north, 70 years before Daniel, here's Tobit and his cousin, or his nephew. Not Tobit, but the nephew at least was finding favor in the court of that king, and he was a righteous man who served Yahweh. Even though he was in exile as an Israelite, he was one of the righteous remnant that went into exile, and just like Tobit was, and he was given favor. He was fulfilling the prayer of King Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 8, when he's praying that when you're in the land of your enemies, if you continue to this covenant, you'll have favor with your captors.
Wow.
And so here we have Tobit's nephew finding that favor, just like Daniel did in the courts of various rulers. And I'm wondering if those timelines, it's hard to tell, because you don't have a good historical timeline for Jonah, but
right,
it makes me think that was the transition when they repented, and a new king, or the king of that heart changed, the heart of that king changed, and he then stopped persecuting and started doing righteousness instead of evil. And so it just makes you wonder, that's not in the spotlight, though, right? It's just a circumstantial thread in the book of Tobit, which could easily correlate with the chapter 3 of Jonah, which we never get the aftermath of chapter 3 of Jonah.
Right.
We just see Jonah go sit down, complain, something grows up over him, God chastises him, reminds him there's 120,000 people plus animals in this place, and he should have mercy and sympathy for them. But then you don't, like, what kind of massive revolution happened in Nineveh after the king and everyone top down decided to repent? There's, to my knowledge, and you can tell me, Trey, if you think I'm mistaken here, but
yeah,
there's only one definition of repentance when we're talking about the days of Jonah, old school repentance.
Exactly.
Like, they're not turning away from the gods of Ninurta, the Assyrian god's laws, and then turning to Ra, the Egyptian
Some other
god's
god.
laws.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Like they're
This is a
repenting
really
to Yahweh.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly what I was going to say next, which just goes to show through the Hebrew Bible we can see this that God's mission was not only to or focused on Israel, even in the Tanakh, even in the Hebrew
Yeah.
Bible. We see God sending prophets to other nations. Look, just if you consider the story of Jonah, the whole plot conflict starts with the fact that God is about to judge this nation.
Hmm.
Huh? Why is he about to judge this nation?
Yeah.
Because they're disobeying his law.
Yeah.
Why would he judge a nation for disobeying his law if they had no idea what that law was? Like,
Right.
obviously, they are aware of, familiar with to some extent, the law of God and are
Yeah.
breaking it. And therefore, God is about to judge them. And therefore, he sends a prophet to them to warn them, to save them. Um, thankfully, they repent, which means that they stop doing evil and start doing good. Isaiah 6, I think it is, or Micah 6. Um, so yes, this actually goes to these stories that we're talking about serves two really key points. The first one is what I just elaborated on about the presence of the law of God even amongst the nations in the Hebrew
Hmm.
Bible. And then second, what we were talking about earlier with regard to Peter, this kind of exclusivistic, the story is primarily or all about Israel. That's just shattered. Like no,
No, it's not. Yeah.
God was working through and with Gentiles throughout the story. It's not all only ever been, or even primarily been about Israel.
Yeah. Israel was supposed to be a set apart nation who was a light to the
Yes.
other nations. So they had a
Yes.
greater expectation for sure. But, and of course, it is the territorial was the place where, the souls of his feet dwelled with the tabernacle. But Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14 is very explicit. This is the whole duty of man, that you fear God and keep his commandments, for God will bring every deed into judgment, whether good or bad.
Mm,
It doesn't say this is the whole duty of Israel. It says this is the whole duty of man, right? So
exactly.
all nations, the nations birth out of the descendants of Noah who got off the boat. The same Noah who was a righteous man, who followed
Yes.
the ways of
Right.
God.
Right.
And even Jubilees chapter 7, verse 20, it specifically says that Noah started to enjoin, which means to fervently teach his children and grandchildren the laws of God that he knew.
Mm,
And
yes.
specifically, avoiding idolatry, loving your neighbors yourself, honoring your father and mother. It lists off many of these pertinent key laws, and they're not all the 10 Commandments, by the way.
Right.
And he's like, it's fascinating because then you see Noah doing sacrifices as a
Hmm.
priest. You see
Hmm.
the priesthood being passed down, even down to Jacob, and then down to Levi in the Book of Jubilees.
And even
Instead
in,
of
if I could cut in real quick, even in, without having to go to Jubilees, which I still think is worth doing, you can see in Genesis 9 that Noah already knew how to distinguish between clean and unclean, which is a
yes,
huge feature
and to do
of the,
sacrifices.
yeah, exactly.
Who taught him that?
Hmm. Who did? I wonder. Huh.
Because is God the same during the days of Noah as he was when he told Moses, if you're going to do this outside of the tabernacle, you need to have an altar built of unhewn stone. Don't let your nakedness go up on the steps of my altar. Like all those instructions that we see for outside sacrifices, which we see Joshua performing with the priests outside of, once they come into the land, but they're outside of the tabernacle. Like we see, like Noah's doing the same thing back then,
Hmm.
and then also I would put forward, Trey, that by the time we get to Genesis 14 and the Melchizedek shows up, that Abraham goes and tithes to, that, this is kind of there's some speculation here, I admit. Okay.
Sure.
But if God's law is eternal, like it says it is in the scriptures, the whole bunch of times, and if it's how we love God and walk with God, and He changes not, then we see there are priests before Mount Sinai,
Yep.
which, I mean, again, circumstantial to Israel. Jethro is the priest of Midian.
Yep.
So what's he what's he doing?
Yeah.
Right? Job is a priest of his
Job's a
kingdom.
priest of Uz, the land of Uz, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And
you've got,
he's a descendant of Esau. So
mm,
Job 42:17 in the Septuagint tells you his whole genealogy. So this is where like there's other priesthoods happening other than
yeah.
just the Levites that were given their priesthood within Israel.
And also, this is something I've picked up on recently. I've noticed it before, but it's having new significance now that we're talking about this. I believe it's Deuteronomy chapter 4 where God makes very clear that he has apportioned certain lands other than the land of
Mhm.
Israel to other peoples.
Yes.
He says explicitly like, "Hey, I'm giving you this land, but don't you dare take the land of these other people because I gave it to them." And
Yeah, yeah.
also, And
I think
also, oh, go ahead.
it's the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites. Like even as they're doing their journey before the days of Deuteronomy, he already tells them, "Now you can't take over these people. I gave
Right.
them their land." You know what I mean?
So it suggests that um,
They have
there's
their own
some
covenant.
that's exactly what I was about to say is that they have some covenant with God about land,
Yeah.
which is really fascinating when you I mean that really expands the brain. I don't know exactly what to say about all that, but the fact is
Well,
there.
think about it like this: um, the once Israel gets into the land at the days of Joshua, and then they start apportioning the land to the peoples, to the different tribes, that then becomes, within the bigger covenant, that then becomes a smaller covenant with Naphtali and that particular
Ah, yes,
boundary
yes.
apportioned, right?
Right, yes.
So all mankind is within the, Romans 7. All mankind, like the law has jurisdiction as long as a man is alive.
Yep, yep.
All mankind is within the big covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you reject it or walk in it is up to you.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's certain people groups can have individualized
Segmented
agreements
versions,
with
yeah.
God for territory or for lineage or for priesthood that's outside of Israel, and that we see tons of examples of that. Right? Where did those
Yeah.
Melchizedek? So like Jubilees 14 matches or Jubilees 13 matches up with Genesis 14 about the Melchizedek. And what's fascinating in Jubilees 13, when it mentions the Melchizedek and the ties that Abraham brought, is that the ties that were brought forward were eaten by the priests, plural.
You saying this is in Jubilees or Genesis?
In Genesis, Jubilees 13,
Mm-hmm.
the parallel account to Genesis 14,
It's priests
when
plural. Got it.
right. So it's not just a singular Melchizedek,
Mm-hmm.
like in the Genesis accounts, just seems to be a
Yep,
singular
yep.
high priest, Melchizedek, high priest of God that comes out and receives the tithes from Abraham. But in Jubilees, those tithes received to Abraham are then given to the plural priests
Right, that makes
to
sense
be eaten because that's
because
the law of
Melchizedek.
God.
Right, right. Well, that makes sense even with just the Genesis account because if Melchizedek is a high priest, that would imply that there's non-high
in
priests.
in order of priesthood.
In order, yeah, exactly. In Hebrews chapter 7 refers to it as an order. Yes.
Right.
Hmm.
So a high priest administers over lesser priests. Those priests
Mm-hmm.
are trained, new priests are chosen and trained up in that order.
Mm-hmm.
This is how an order works, right?
Right, right.
So just because we have now the Levite order doesn't mean there weren't other orders. And we clearly know because
Mm,
here's Jethro.
exactly. And no condemnation on him either. There's no
Oh,
word
he
of
he does a
condemnation.
burnt offering and it's accepted by Yahweh in Exodus 18.
And he is a counselor for
Yeah, yeah,
Moses.
yeah.
Like, yeah, this is a super fascinating thread. But I'm trying to remember where exactly we got off on this and what the oh, it
But
was
just
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 talking about the law of
the
God before
relevance.
Moses. Yeah,
Yeah, and the super all-encompassing superseding law of God outside of borders, boundaries, and culture,
exactly.
right? To the point where God will choose other people who are faithful to Him, and from within them, He'll, He's able to appoint ministers within that culture, right? But the Bible
Yeah.
seems to focus its spotlight on Israel, right?
Yes.
That once we get to off the boat with Noah, we get into the days of Abraham up to Christ. It really has that major spotlight focus, but there's
Yeah.
lots of other obedience and transgression happening outside of that spotlight.
That's such a key point because I think a lot of Christian theology is predicated on the misunderstanding that like everything outside of Israel was just damned. It's like, no, no, that's not the story.
Yeah.
Obviously not, with what we're talking about, especially with regard to, for example, Jonah. But
Yeah. In Job
go ahead.
19, Job says that he was a righteous judge of his people.
Mm,
You know,
hmm.
is that not the same type of parallel we see in Hebrews where it talks about Lot being a judge that was conflicted in his soul
Mm,
in Sodom?
mm,
So in the ancient days, the judges would line up at the gates of the city to where they would hear matters and disputes and adjudicate, right?
hmm, hmm.
And so it's like Lot was righteous, considered righteous, worthy of saving.
Mm,
How's
yes.
but he's in Sodom, right? Um, obviously he still was a very flawed and broken person, as you see, uh, soon after the destruction. But the point is, it claims that he was a righteous person within that extremely unrighteous territory.
Mm, hmm.
And, he is even, yes, I know he's a nephew of Abraham, but he's not considered like a son like Ishmael, Esau, or Jacob or anything like that, or Isaac, like lineage son of Abraham, right? He's just a
Right.
nephew from another brother that had died. I think it was Haran. So that's where, he's being protected by God. That's covenant behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And like you already mentioned, he's explicitly called a righteous man. I think it's by
Yeah,
Peter. Yeah.
yeah.
Fascinating. I think this reminds me of something tangential uh, with regard to exegesis of the book of Romans, but I've been fascinated with this one particular verse in Romans for a long time, which is Romans chapter 5, verse 13. And at the risk of, quoting a text out of context, no, I'm kidding. Um, I do just want to note that what he says there is really fascinating. I'm reading from the NRSVUE. He says, "Sin was indeed in the world before law." Okay. So sin was in the world before whatever law he's talking about. But then he says, but sin is not reckoned where there is no law. Okay. So get the point, guys. The point is there was sin that was being reckoned before this whatever law he's talking about. But there is no such thing as sin being reckoned where there is no law. Okay. So
You
sin
think
was
it's
being
rhetorical?
so sin was being reckoned before this law he's talking about existed. But there must have therefore been some law that existed because sin was being reckoned. And
Right.
so this goes to exactly what we're talking about, I think, which is that even before the law that the scribes and the Pharisees insisted on, even before the law that was given on through the Sinai covenant, right? Even before that was given in that form, there was the law of God through which sin was being reckoned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Otherwise, the flood wouldn't have happened.
Or otherwise, God wouldn't have been judging um, Nineveh.
Right.
Exactly.
Otherwise, Cain wouldn't have been guilty of murder.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Otherwise, Cain and Abel wouldn't have been bringing first fruit tithes,
Mm, mm.
actual offerings. And by the way, what does the law say for those tithes? Who eats of those tithes according to the law?
The, the priests,
Who's the priest
right?
they presented those offerings to?
Ooh, good question. I haven't thought about this. Maybe Adam? Yeah. Yeah, probably Adam.
He is a Melchizedek. A Melchizedek just means a righteous ruler. And most of the
Hmm.
patriarchs were the righteous rulers.
Fascinating. This actually, I haven't dug too deep into this, but I know the Bible Project has a series called The Royal Priest, which they present Adam and Eve as royal priests in that case. But that's a new thought. I hadn't thought about that before. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. So Adam as a priest, he's the one that would have been administering the sacrificial offering. That makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't that be obvious? Yeah.
In Jubilees chapter 3, when the day that Adam's kicked out of the garden, it says that he offered incense on the altar to God.
Hmm. Hmm.
The day that he's getting kicked out. So it says that Adam and Eve were there for 7 years being trained up by the angels. And so 7 years
Hmm.
is a good training program, right? That's a good
Sure
long
enough.
time to know how to live, right?
Yeah.
And that my wife and I all the time we talk about aspects of the priesthood that aspects not just of the priesthood, but also just normal life that we assume angels had to teach mankind this type of stuff because like how do you just accidentally stumble upon this type of stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like how did like making sourdough bread. Have you ever made sourdough bread before?
No, I've seen it made, never done it myself.
Yeah, so it's like a process, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have this sourdough starter, right? You got to
Mm-hmm.
have the starter
Mm-hmm.
little lump. And so in the commandments of God, we have to get the leaven out on the first day of unleavened bread, right? But that
Mm-hmm.
just you don't get in the instructions of God for how these people even had the lump of leaven in their house to begin with, how they knew
Mm.
how to make leavened bread to begin with.
Yeah.
And the to suggest that mankind was just stumbled upon how to make leaven with allowing it to sit a certain amount of time for it to ferment and all the stuff and the yeast and all that. Bro, that like who's got time to experiment with that? Who how would you
Yeah.
even think of that?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that we have reasons both in the Bible and then also in the so-called extra, extra biblical apocrypha, Deuterocanon, blah blah blah. We have answers to some of these questions, right? One primary is that the instruments of warfare, the instruments of agriculture were all taught to humans by spiritual beings.
So if you are in the garden for 7 years and you're getting tutelage directly from angels on these things,
Yeah.
And God's law is eternal. The
Mm.
Sabbath's already been established on day 7 anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jubilee 6 claims that they were keeping Shavuot from the beginning of creation, that the angels in heaven are keeping Shavuot from the beginning of creation.
Mm.
So, and if they're teaching Adam how to live in the garden before he goes out into the land of his creation,
Hmm.
then are they teaching them how to do priestly duties? Which means you not only you have to know the difference between clean and unclean, but you got to know the difference between leaven and unleavened.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what do you put at God's house, right? With the showbread, like
Mm.
you've got to know, like you've got to know things. You know what I mean?
I think what this helps us get at is that we can read we can read the Bible, especially these kind of seemingly esoteric, hard to get early chapters of Genesis, and we can already see that there's more to the story than we're being told explicitly. Like we
Mm-hmm.
need to read it, ask some critical questions, and then be open to other sources of information, like
Well,
what you're referring to.
yeah, that's the sad part. The reality of 2,000 years of intentionally muddying the waters of so-called sacred writings, right?
Hmm.
Where we offer a basic Bible course here at Kingdom of Context, and the first class of the basic Bible course, it's like an introduction, like to Christianity, to all these topics that we're talking about. I systematically go through, and the first class of the entire course is how we got our Bibles.
I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so did you watch it?
I have not seen the whole thing. No.
Okay, so in that we basically try to review, like, there's there's specific markers of time in the last 2,000 years where books that were being widely read were suddenly taken out of circulation by the leaders of the day, right? So,
Mm.
first century reformer of Judaism, Rabbi Akiva, specifically decided to tell people, do not read Enoch and Jubilees. He didn't believe that people should be reading them. So suddenly they're no longer in the circulation of what the Jewish leadership of that day is considering their quote unquote closed canon. They didn't use that terminology back then, by the
Of
way,
course, of course.
of closed canon. Like, it
Right.
was very fluid still, but they just called them sacred writings that people shouldn't read because people weren't wise enough to understand them. And I also think that it has a lot to do with all the prophecies of Christ in First Enoch as well. But
Yeah,
they
it's
were,
theologically motivated for sure.
yeah, for sure, yeah. Um, and then you have different collections of scriptures all throughout history that don't match. So
Right.
no matter how many times the ortho bros will try to tell you that we gave you the Bible, we chose all the books in it. Oh, really? Is that what the Tawhid Eastern Orthodox agree? Do they agree with you?
Well, don't
You
mention
know,
them. They don't matter.
did the Syriac communities agree with you? Did the 14th century Armenian communities agree with you when they included all types of other books that are not in the official canon? And in fact, I mean, well, the Council of Trent finally decided in the 1500s, oh, this is going to be the Holy Roman Catholic canon finally. And Pope Gregory the 13th decided, oh, by the way, I'm going to make a list of banned books that people can't read. And guess what? He included Jubilees in that list.
Hmm.
That means people were reading it.
Yes, exactly.
There's an
Yeah,
8th century chronographer. His name was George Synkelos. He's a Greek chronographer in the 8th century. And he pulls the majority of his uh, history of the world pertaining to the time spans from the creation of Adam and Eve up to the flood. He pulls a lot of that information from the book of Jubilees. He talks
oh
about it.
wow. Wow.
So,
Yeah,
like, there was all kinds of books in circulation that the modern Christian is just so unaware of,
yeah.
thinking that they have the holy, undefiled, and pure as fine as silver KJV 66 books, that people have no clue the history of the church.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful for people such as yourself and others who try to quote unquote open up Pandora's box here. That's not a very good metaphor, but I think you know what I mean. That they really try to help shine a light on the truth of the matter. I remember when I was first kind of transitioning out of the oneness Pentecostal movement. That's where I came from, by the way, and into more like evangelical, reformed expressions of the Christian faith. I was talking to someone who ended up becoming Eastern Orthodox, and I was expressing to him my doubts about the doctrines of the Trinity and the Incarnation and all of that. And I'd kind of started,
Mariology.
yeah, I had started to kind of move into what is now known as biblical Unitarianism, which I think we both are pretty much in agreement with some small differences here or there. But I remember the thing that he told me was, you got to be careful, Trey, because if you start questioning these things, eventually you're going to question the canon. And it was like, I mean, at the time, I remember thinking to myself, like, no, I'm never going to question the canon. Why would I question the canon? Like, obviously, this is the Bible, these are the scriptures. But I guess to be
Which
fair to this,
canon? Like
yeah,
the modern Greek canon, the Roman canon, or
mm,
the Protestant
yeah.
66? Which
Hey,
one?
to be fair to this brother, his prophecy was proved true. However,
Right.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm sure that it's not necessarily a bad thing, I should say,
Yeah.
because I think this is a super fascinating subject. Well, you've already kind of spilled the beans about Enoch and Jubilees, about how um, they were shut down, they were prohibited, they were banned by various authorities, starting with Rabbi Akiva in the Jewish tradition, but also with the Council of Trent and Pope Gregory later in the Christian tradition. I'm curious, you wrote a study guide about First Enoch, so I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that book in general and what significance and relevance you think that it has for the disciple of Jesus.
Yeah. First Enoch, my goodness. Not only is there prophecies of the elect one, as it refers to the Son of Man, that goes with the Ancient of Days, who is the one who returns in the power of the Almighty to rat out the wicked, and the second coming. It has a lot of prophecies about the second coming in First Enoch,
Hmm.
and it's it's a powerful book, man. I mean, it tells you that they were keeping the commandments of God in the before the flood, and they knew what the Sabbath was. Methuselah and Lamech are teaching their children outside of the ones not named, other than Noah, like all their children and grandchildren, teaching them the movements of the stars in relationship to keeping the festivals of God,
Hmm.
right? Which
Because
is
that's
what we
what they were
see.
for in
That's what they're
Genesis 1.
for. Genesis 1:14.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you just get so much confirmation. This
Hmm.
is why Genesis is historically was considered a lesser account. I don't mean to say like lesser in theological weight, but like Jubilees is called Little Genesis, not because it's smaller in volume, but because it has more little details.
Hmm.
That's why it was called Little Genesis.
Hmm.
But other times it's called the Apocalypse of Moses.
Right,
Think about that,
right.
Trey.
The
What if it just called it
apocalypse of
of
Moses.
Moses?
Mm-hmm.
What if it was just called that all the time?
Mm.
Be like, oh, Jesus said, in the writings of Moses,
Mm.
like what are we? But yet here's the Jewish leadership who also rejected Christ, saying, yeah, I don't, these two books over here, we don't need these two books, we don't need these Enoch and Jubilees books. Like, no.
Yeah, they're
but
they're
here but
supporting these Christians a little too much. We got to get rid of that.
but meanwhile, the book of Enoch is emphatically speaking about the second coming of Christ, the same prophecies that Jude is repeating. It's telling you the entire storyline of why angels don't have wives and why the Genesis 6 concept of them taking wives and creating Nephilim was even a reality, which Jesus affirms that concept that the angels of heaven are not given in marriage or taking marriage. Like they're not appointed wives, right?
Yeah,
You don't get that information in Genesis to Malachi. You get that
right.
in Enoch, right?
Mm.
You don't even get the information as far as where Azazel comes from.
Yeah, you just get
Like,
this random reference on the Day of Atonement rituals in Leviticus
right.
16 to this Azazel, and it's like, well, who, what in the world is this? But lo and behold, there's
First Enoch
there's an
chapter 9.
explanation.
Yeah. First Enoch chapter 9 tells you.
Mm.
It also explains to you the difference in the rebellious angels, who they were, what they did, which
Mm.
gives you an understanding of Deuteronomy 13 when it is
Mm.
and 8 and 18, as far as leading people away with enchantments and sorcery and necromancy and all
Mm.
the ways of the occult, idolatry. It tells you how this was the beginning of idolatry. The watchers who birthed these unclean spiritual offspring called the Nephilim through the daughters of women, that they uh, that that was the beginning of idolatry. Mankind started worshiping the sons of the Watchers, the Nephilim,
Mm.
and making idols to them, and doing magic and trying to strive to learn the secrets of heaven that the angels were telling them. And then, of
Mm.
course, it was the angels, the rebellious angels, were sharing this information with mankind, not in a productive way, but in a way that was
No,
going to destroy them. And
exactly.
so it was.
If I could just say this real quick,
Oh, yeah, good.
exactly like the serpent in
Mm-hmm.
Genesis 3. That's the exact
Yep.
pattern.
Yep.
Hey, God says, do these things. This is my way. I've got this tree of life, this fruit that you can eat from, but don't eat of this over here. And the serpent comes and is like, no, eat of that, eat of that. It's gonna be you'll get exactly what you want if you just do exactly what God told you not to do.
Yeah, it's same thing as the all the rebellious angels, Azazel included,
Mm,
which First Enoch references Azazel in two different capacities. In my understanding of
hmm.
studying this book for so long, and is that he's referenced as Azazel, but also as Gadriel,
Okay.
and that's in chapter 69. So in the same way, Satan is referenced as Mastema in the book of Jubilees by two different names. In the same way, we're seeing it in Revelation. Satan's called what, three or four different names, right? The
Yeah. Yeah.
dragon, the serpent of old,
The
Satan, like
beast.
so like you know, he's has a lot of different epithets, but the actions that he does are always the same. And that's where you see Azazel is Gadriel. We even see in Isaiah 65, the nations were still worshiping Gadriel, but he's generically called Gad, the god of fortune.
Hmm.
So that's where Gad comes from. To not the descendant of Jacob, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tribe
Different
of
Gad.
Gad.
Right.
But Gad to the nations, they were worshiping the god of fortune, whom was called Gad. And so
Interesting.
that's in Isaiah 65, of which traces back to Zeus and the prophets of Maori, and how it's Satan basically.
Super fascinating, man. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for that brief introduction, and I definitely recommend, as I already mentioned, Sean has written a study guide on the Book of First Enoch. So if you want that, check that out on Amazon. I will include a link to that in the video description. So now I'm curious. You've already mentioned Jubilees and how that definitely is a sacred writing that we should take seriously and learn from. But I'm curious about another book that my brother Matthew Jansen, whom we're both friends with and familiar with his content, he mentioned recently to me, and I've heard about it before, haven't really thought about it, but he was in his short introduction to lunar Sabbaths, and I don't want to get distracted with that just yet. But in his introduction to lunar Sabbaths, he mentions the relevance of the Book of Jasher to that issue, and so I'm curious what your thoughts are about that book in particular with regard to the question of sacred writings.
To my research, what people are calling Jasher in most Torah observant communities actually goes back to a writing that was included in the Talmud. It was a rabbinic writing. Do not see it being mentioned in any of the lists of books considered as a part of any canon throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
Just it was just held within the Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually did a video on my channel. We have a show that we've done over the years called Honor of Kings, and we look at these quote unquote apocryphal, pseudepigraphal, deuterocanonical books, and we try to hold them to the canon of 66 and see if how much theological continuity we can
Mm-hmm.
find. And unfortunately, Jasher does not pass the test. So there's
Gotcha. Okay.
some things proposed in Jasher. There's some theology and history proposed in Jasher that I just it seems to be a writing of a rabbi at some point in the history,
Mm.
but was never even considered by the Jews. It's not the Jasher mentioned in the Bible.
Yeah, that's the
And
key thing is, of course, that, people are referring, I
yeah,
should say that they think that this book of Jasher they're reading is the book of Jasher mentioned in Kings. And that's the key point of contention. If it's not, then we have a problem. And it seems like
and
you're
that's
thinking it's not.
it's not. That seems to be a transliteration actually of that word is the book of the righteous one
Right.
or the book of the just, and then it gets
Mm,
transliterated to Jasher
mm,
in Joshua chapter 10. So um, I don't think it's the same book
gotcha.
personally. I know it's
Fair
got
enough.
similar aspects to it. It's got some. It really does have some wild statements in the book of Jasher, like Og surviving the flood and being so large that he can break off a piece of a mountain and a rock carry a rock so big that he could destroy the entire encampment of the children of Israel in the wilderness with one rock.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's actually relevant to a question some people have asked about this whole so-called divine council worldview, with
Yeah.
respect to, Genesis chapter 6 and the giants, the Nephilim that were killed off by the flood. Well, then how do you get giants after the flood? And some people are like, well, there
Oh,
was a
first
giant
Enoch
that
tells you.
yeah, there's speculation, and I've actually heard this, which seems to kind of be what you're referring to there with Og from the Book of Jasher, where he just like held on to the side of the ark and survived the flood and then repopulated the earth afterward. But you're saying there's
So a
actually,
giant held
yeah,
onto an ark without food or water for a year.
for a year, yeah, and
A, a,
survived
a giant who would need to eat like four
way
steer a
more.
day,
Yeah,
like
yeah. I guess he's
minimum.
catching fish as he goes. But you're saying there's actually an answer to the question of why are there Why
Yeah.
are there giants after the flood when the point of the flood was actually to wipe them out? I'd love to hear that. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's in First Enoch chapter 6 and 7, where it talks about what the angels were showing mankind, and it goes into explaining that they were um, that basically. I mean, if you want to put some slides up, this might be helpful to
Go
anyone
ahead.
listening.
Go ahead. Yeah. Feel
Yeah, I'll
free.
see if I can share them real quick. 1 second. I think you have to enable sharing.
Oh no, did I have that broken? Here, I'm gonna pause while I get that figured out, and then we can resume.
So in First Enoch chapter 6 and 7, as it's talking about the rebellious angels and what they were showing mankind, various types of things, it says they took wives and they showed them root cuttings and enchantments, and then the women became pregnant and bare giants. Does that sound like a coherent sentence to you?
It's definitely, I want to know more. I don't know exactly what it means.
Yeah. So like if you're gonna take a wife and then you detour and learn garden and teach her gardening, but then come back to, oh, and then she got pregnant later and then she had a giant. But so I decided, all right, well, what's going on here? I looked up the word enchantments. Lo and behold, here's our Deuteronomy 18 moment for sorcery.
Mm,
Okay.
hmm
Same
hmm
word in the Hebrew. I think it's the word kefar, or kibar, for enchantment, sorcery, spells. And then the root cuttings, I looked up root cuttings and I was like, what's this? And it's an entire science. And there's hormones in the bases of roots and trees and plants. And that you can manipulate the types of hormones. There's 5 different types. It's like gibberellins, auxins, uh, abscisic acid, ethylene, and there's one more,
Nice
something
memory. Yeah, I saw
something
you
with a
mention
T.
this. I saw you mention this in your Investigating Babylon series.
Right.
Hmm
And so those 5 growth hormones will determine how deep the roots grow, how thick the stem of the plant grows, or the tree of the trunk of the tree, how tall that stem grows before it sprouts, and then how those stems that sprout out from the root, how long and thick they grow before it flowers and before it decides to bear fruit or whatnot. So those 5 growth hormones affect all the height, width, dimensions, flowering, everything about the plant and the tree. And there's an art of root cutting. So you can take these and you can apply them to other things, and it affects the growth of other things. This is actually where you get miracle grow. So, like if you go to Home Depot and you see a bag of Miracle Grow that came out in the 1960s after the U.S. government researched gibberellins, which is one of the main ingredients of Miracle Grow is gibberellins. And even though you just topically can put on these extra growth hormones, it will affect the plants and cause them to grow bigger because
Interesting.
you're putting growth hormones on them, right?
So the
So
idea is that these, obviously through the influence of spiritual beings, these humans at the time, um, well, specifically the women, the ones that they took as wives, were practicing what the Torah calls sorcery or enchantments through this scientific quote unquote method, and that somehow what they learned there allowed them to opt to give birth to larger than normal humans.
it's a mixture of things. Okay,
Okay.
the enchantments is actual sorcery,
hmm
right? So the root cutting is a science. It's not sorcery,
Yep.
but it's
Yep.
a science.
Yep.
Um, but manipulatively done, it becomes pharmakia. But
Okay.
the enchantments is a process because what the Nephilim that were birthed from the Watchers doing this, they were not men. The Nephilim are called in the Book of Enoch unclean spirits.
hmm
So that's a huge ontological difference.
So these giants that are mentioned in Genesis 6 and then after the flood, you're suggesting
Just
they're not human at all?
just before the flood is the
Hmm
unclean spirits birthed from the Watchers through this particular practice.
Okay.
After the flood, you just see big
Giant
men.
humans. Yeah.
So they
Okay.
still, you could still, while a person is pregnant, while a woman's pregnant in gestation with the baby, if additional growth hormones are introduced, then you're going to affect the child's growth. But
Okay.
it's still a man, though. It's still
Yeah,
of
it's still a human.
mankind,
Yeah.
right? So there's a difference between a spiritual being and someone that's of the earth, someone that's of
Right.
mankind, right?
Right.
Post flood giants are of mankind. They're just genetically manipulated to be bigger. In the same
Okay.
way that in Numbers 13:33, the spies come back with the big fruit, they genetically manipulate the fruit, right?
Oh, interesting. Oh, wow. I've never thought about that. Why were the grapes so big?
Yeah. Yeah. The pomegranates and the grapes, because you need big food to feed big
Yeah.
people.
Right.
So,
Mm.
yeah. So That's just something we can do today, by the way.
Fascinating. Okay, so I'm trying to get this clear in my head. You're saying that the reason there were giants after the flood was because the giants after the flood were the product of this essentially, uh, sorcery on the basis of some science. But the giants before the flood were purely, specifically the Nephilim, they were spiritual beings. They were not actually
So
human.
let's back up. Let's think about giants as the size of the body, what
Yeah.
inhabits the body, but that size of the body can be affected by the growth hormones. What inhabits the body is either a spiritual being or of man. So this is why the giants before the flood, when they were killed, they're left over, as First Enoch 15 says, as disembodied, unclean spirits.
Yeah, the Rephaim, right? That's what
Yeah.
they're called elsewhere.
That's there's a lot of contention about the use of the word
Okay.
in Deuteronomy,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I don't because to what
Sorry.
I understand, it's okay. What I understand from First Enoch is that the spirits. This is by the way the same storyline in Jubilees. They synchronize, so
Hmm.
it's also fitting that the Pharisaic and Sadduceic classes of the first century who struggled with the idea of angels taking wives, that they would want to reject these books. Okay. And
Hmm.
we have this in the writings of Tertullian, where he talks about this, and he's questioning why the Jewish leadership would doubt the fact that angels could take wives. So I don't know. I can pull that quote up for you later if you like. But
No, I know what you're talking about, and I trust you. So the point is that the angels in Genesis 6, the spiritual beings, they did take human women as wives, and
right,
the offspring of this forbidden union was
an actual
were the
spiritual
Nephilim.
being
Okay,
was a
yeah,
spiritual being
okay,
that had a giant body.
okay. So a spiritual, non-human being and body.
Right.
Got
That's
it.
why they're called unclean. That you know, it says in I think it's in chapter 10 that the Nephilim, the sons of the Watchers, were birthed to attack, oppress, and destroy mankind.
Which, of course, fits perfectly with what's said in Genesis 6 about violence in the land.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. And
So
so,
then post flood,
mhm,
there's no more, because all of the Samyaza and all of the angels under his charge who took wives and did this,
they're
Azazel
in
wasn't one of them.
they're in prison.
They
Yeah.
went to Tartarus. They're
Yep.
not getting out. They're not out during the days of Deuteronomy 3 mentioning giants in the land, or Numbers 13. They're not out at that point.
Which
And
Peter and Jude mention their imprisonment, I believe.
only in chains of darkness until the day of
Yep.
judgment, right?
Yep.
So right off the bat, all the angels mentioned that had come down in the days of Jared, Genesis 6, Jubilees 5, First Enoch 6 through 15, the 199 of them are put away in Tartarus, and only Azazel's left out. And he's given a different judgment, and it doesn't ascribe the same sins to him. He's said that he's guilty of different types of sins, and he's given a different judgment, and he's left out. He's not sent to Tartarus. So this is why we still have Satan, whom we must resist, still running around.
Mm,
And this is why going forward after the flood and into the Gospels, Christ is only encountering unclean spirits trying to possess
mm,
people,
mm.
and a singular angel that tries to tempt him and says, all the nations have been given under my authority, and I'll give them to you if you bow down to me. Right? It's not a group
Yeah.
of angels. It's a singular angel left out. And this is why, go to First Chronicles 21, go to First Samuel, go to Job 1 and 2. There's only one Satan, a singular Satan being mentioned in conversational dialogue, a he, not a plural, throughout history, because the rest of the rebellious angels are locked away in Tartarus, and Satan, Azazel, the dragon, he's not going to be locked away until the second coming.
Got it. So there's this you keep using the word angel, and it's hard to, because there's this notion of, spiritual beings, or, quote unquote divine non-human beings. But it's also kind of getting mixed with the notion of unclean spirits. So I just want to disambiguate this a little bit. What you're saying is
Mhm.
that the Satan, or the devil, is the only one left of those supernatural beings that were involved to some extent, in what we can read about in Genesis 6. Okay. The rest were put in prison. This other one was left, and he's the one that's being referred to in the rest of the scriptures as the Satan, the devil. But there are also unclean spirits.
Mhm.
These are also spiritual beings. They're not necessarily what typically comes to be called angels. They are supernatural. They're not humans. They're so
They're spiritual beings, but
there's
they're unclean.
they're spiritual beings. They're unclean spirits. Yeah. Okay.
They're
So
called
now
spirits of wickedness, the gods of the nations. So who do they answer to?
it would seem Satan, that one spiritual being. Yeah.
Which verse tells us that?
I don't have an answer. I'm just guessing based on what I'm
No, I
hearing
mean,
you say.
I agree. There is no answer because it's
Yeah.
only in Jubilees chapter 10.
Oh, okay. What's the answer?
After the flood, Noah notices the unclean spirits are seducing his sons and grandsons back into idolatry, back into warfare, back into corruption. And he prays, he says specifically, I know how your watchers acted in my day. And now their sons, these unclean spirits, are seducing my children, grandchildren back into sin, into corruption, and destruction. Something's got to be done. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, right? And so then the response from Yahweh through the angel is, all right, we're going to lock up 90% of them, and 10% will be left out under the control of Mastema, also called Satan, in the very same passage.
So 10% of those unclean spirits at that time are still active in the world under the authority of the Satan,
The
Mastema,
only the only angel the only rebellious angel that was left after the flood, which is Azazel,
or yeah, Azazel,
Satan.
Azazel.
Yeah,
Fascinating, fascinating. And
that's
he's the
why
one. Go ahead.
in the Gospels, and 1 Corinthians 4:4, he's the God of this world. Ephesians 6, spiritual wickedness in high places. Like that's why you only see Satan and unclean spirits. Therefore, after.
Hmm. Interesting. And you got all this from non-canonical books.
Well,
That's great.
if I was raised in Ethiopia, I would just have say I got it from the Bible.
Exactly, exactly.
They have
Because
both of those books in there. If I took all my theology from the Dead Sea Scrolls, then I would be like, all right, well then it's I just got that's they have the whole story in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Both
yeah,
Jubilees and Enoch being found in great abundance next to Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all the other books. And so it's
yeah.
clearly there's a long history there with both of those books and how they've been suppressed by the mainstream dominant church, specifically the early church fathers who came in with a very philosophic mindset to which they also believed angels can't do this because angels are non-corporeal beings.
Mm,
How can they take a woman? They're
exactly.
celestial divine beings that are not corporeal with our nature. And I mean, they come in with this Gnostic view of like, oh, they're in a different realm and they don't interact with the material like we do. How could they impregnate a woman? Yet Jubilees 15:27 says all the angels upon their creation were circumcised.
Yeah, we're gonna have to really fundamentally rethink the presuppositions of our worldview to make sense of this data. I mean, it seems quite obvious, therefore, that the spiritual beings in question, including God the Father, and we'll get there, has some kind of body
Yeah.
that can do
But
things.
when I interview the pastors and the people that come on my channel, and I try to draw their attention with with nice questions, being like, "Hey, have you ever asked yourself where these unclean spirits came from in the Gospels?" Like
Yeah,
I,
right. Where did they
many of
come
the
from?
past,
Yeah.
yeah, because many of the pastors don't realize they are mentioned in Deuteronomy. By the way, they're called the Shadim in the Hebrew, right? But most pastors don't know that, so they're just like, well, they're fallen angels. I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
can you tell me when that happened or what was going on there? Because the only other reference to rebellious angels is in Genesis 6, and they actually had sex with women, and because they were attracted to them. So, do you agree that angels could take a wife because they found them attractive and copulate and create these offspring called Nephilim? Well, that's highly debated. Some people think those are just the sons of Seth, and like that was
Okay,
just
but
the
then what's the answer, Mr. Pastor?
right.
What's
So
the
they
answer
have
then?
no answer for like
Yeah,
where these unclean spirits came from,
right.
right? And that's where it gets real sticky, right?
Mm,
Sometimes, especially with it seems to be, we're moving into this ever increasing progressive Christianity era,
mm,
which is
mm.
not good.
No.
which seminaries are teaching people like, you know, Satan's not a real entity. He's just a malevolent
Mm,
force. He's just the temptation you feel when you want to disobey God. Like
mm.
it's completely new age. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll ask the pastor, all right, in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, when it says Satan took Jesus up to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the earth at a glance. And what? So is that a real person?
Mm,
Is that a real entity? Revelation 12, verse 13, it says Satan is thrown down to the earth and he's full of fury. Woe to the ends of the earth. He's full of fury and wrath. Is that a real entity? that's thrown down. Like, what are we talking about here, right? Job 1 and 2,
Yeah,
Satan has a conversation with God, uh, talking about Job. Like, it's not just a malevolent force. Like, so there's a
yeah,
lot of philosophy
exactly.
that's infiltrated the church. There's a lot of problems there. And most churches don't teach history in general in relationship to the Bible. So they don't realize that the ancient Greeks, they don't realize that the Hebrews understood Zeus, the patron god of the Greeks, as Satan.
Yeah, that
They
was a
don't.
new thought to me when I was starting to review your Investigating Babylon presentation. When you
Yeah.
made that connection, that was new to me. I'd never heard that. I mean, obviously, I'd figured it at a certain point when I realized that there are legitimate, real. When I say legitimate, I mean real. Sorry, there are real gods of the nations, right? And there are real spiritual beings.
Mm.
I had figured like, yeah, these are obviously rebellious sons of God, quote unquote fallen angels to a certain degree. Maybe some of them are real, some of them are not. Some of them are just made up. Maybe some of them are actually connected to real spiritual beings. But I'd never made that specific connection that the high god of the most high god of the Greco-Roman civilization being Zeus or Jupiter being the Satan of reference in the scriptures.
Mhm. Did you know that like Zeus had different uh, incarnations? He had different representations, or what they would say manifestations of who Zeus was. Like sometimes he's an eagle,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he's the wolf. Like Zeus would be um, some that could change forms, so to speak, right?
Mm.
In their different mythos. Did you know that the most earliest manifestation or non human looking depiction of Zeus was a serpent?
Whoa! No way.
Yeah. So same thing with
Wow.
Brahma to the Indians, the patron god Brahma to the Indians. He's a serpent god. Same thing with Ra.
Wow.
Ra's representation is the serpent wrapping
Wow.
around the sun on top of the Apis bull. Like that's it's Satan. It's the serpent. It's the dragon of old. It's like it's the one who fools the nations and persecutes those who have the testimony of Jesus and keep the commandments of God. It's like it's the same guy. He's just that's why he fools the nations. He doesn't represent himself to all these different cultures and people groups as the same character. Like he
Hmm.
he will represent himself to what they would accept. Right.
Wow,
So
this is so
suddenly,
so fascinating.
yeah,
I just at this point I feel like I have to mention I've already alluded to it a couple times, but when I was doing some research for this discussion, just kind of digging a little bit more into your channel, I noted that the most popular video on your channel, the one that has the most views, it's got like 470,000 views, something like that, was your summary presentation about your Investigating Babylon series,
yeah.
which kind of digs into this stuff. And I got to tell you, like, I find that all of that super interesting. Earlier this year, actually back in May timeframe, I was introduced to a figure who you may be aware of. If you're not, you definitely should look into his stuff because you're probably going to glean some things from him that'll even solidify your case more. There's a figure, he's secular, but his name is Graham Hancock. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Graham, I was introduced to him and I was just floored. I was like, okay, there's some truth in here. I don't think everything about this is correct, but there's some really intriguing true things, and I'm seeing all these connections to the biblical story. And it really just kind of opened up my imagination, my thoughts about the exact kinds of things that you talk about in your Investigating Babylon series. So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's a lot of times the churches will talk about Satan, but they don't really get into depth, right?
No.
They remind you there's a boogeyman, and sometimes they'll even get excited and in between songs they'll do a devil stomp on stage, right? Stomping on the devil. But when you ask them logical questions, like so in the last temptation there in Luke 4, Matthew 4, when it says Satan took Jesus to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world at a glance. How did he do that? Physically, how did he take Jesus at the end of his 40 days of fasting? Did they just go traverse 20 miles up to the top of a mountain?
Mm.
How physically did he do that? Did he pick him up by the scruff of his neck, like in Bell and the Dragon, when Haggai is picked up by the scruff of his neck and taken over to see Daniel?
Or Ezekiel when it says that God grabbed him by his hair and brought him
Yep.
into Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how is this happening? Right?
Hmm.
Is Jesus going to let Satan grab him by the hair and pick him up? Like, what are we talking about here, yo?
Mm.
What is going on? Like
Well, I
all
want to hear
these.
what you think's going on exactly because I'm
Well, that's
curious.
the Investigating Babylon series. I talk about all the ancient concepts of the Vimanas. Like they had their own
Yeah.
transportation, which they literally have historical record to say these crafts were given to us by the gods, and with them we can traverse up and down in the heaven.
Yeah, which just a note for those who are hearing this but don't know exactly what's being
Yeah,
talked about. It's essentially he digs into this historical phenomenon, especially with regard to Indian texts that talk about essentially what we would consider today to be like UFO
yep,
um, type um, ships that traverse through the heavens. So definitely
yeah.
recommend that series. The summary presentation is about 2 hours long. It's a 21 part series that covers past, present, and future. I'm definitely going to be digging into that some more because it's super
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's historically documented that they had
Hmm.
advanced technology, which is advanced flying machines. They called them Vimanas. The Egyptians had them. All that Babylon had them. That they and it's documented. It's just you. It's like all these other things in life that tries to suppress the truth and unrighteousness.
Mm.
Where you don't get the official story from the mainstream media, you don't get the official story from academia because they have their evolution narrative. And this, the giants, ancient tech, fallen angels, all of it goes against their evolution narrative,
It's exactly
right?
like Rabbi Akiva, Pope Gregory. Oh, these things, they don't fit our theology. They don't fit
Right.
our what we want you to believe. So we're going to just
Yeah.
not tell you about that. Just exclude that from the canon so you never read about it and learn about it.
And instead, anytime you try to bring up a question, they'll say, "Oh, be careful! Don't read those. You might lose your salvation." Right.
Huh.
So, I mean, have you heard that when people bring up books like
Yes.
Enoch and Jubilees? That's
Yes.
literally what Rabbi Akiva said. Was
Yeah.
that if people are not wise enough to read these, they're going to fall into heresy. And you're like, okay, bro, same. It's the same intimidation tactic since immemorial, right? It's like these
Yeah.
guys, they're gatekeeping the faith, right? Like Christ said, I can't remember the exact quote, Matthew 23, but he's talking about
Hmm.
you prevent people from coming to the kingdom, and then when
Yeah.
you make a proselyte, he becomes twice the son of Gehenna, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
it's the same concept, right? So that's where I just try to, go with what the Bible's actually saying. I try to define the words. I try to look at the history that's been documented. And
Hmm.
then you start to see, oh my goodness, like the Bible was taking place in and around all this history.
Mm.
So like the seat of Pergamum, Revelation chapter 2. Did you know the seat of the biggest and most well-known historical temple in ancient Turkey, which is Anatolia, which is Pergamum, mentioned in Revelation 2 was the seat of Zeus.
Mm. Hmm.
And he calls that the seat of Satan in Revelation
Mm.
chapter 2.
Mm.
Right? So like, oh, suddenly you get some context, right? Some
Yeah,
historical
exactly.
context.
Some context, exactly. Which
Yeah.
I just have to applaud, first of all, your courage, your effort to not be intimidated, by the
Oh no,
gatekeepers.
I'm
And
a I'm I'm a stubborn dude apparently.
yeah, well, it
Because
serves you and others well. And so I'm very grateful that you've taken these kinds of things on because how else would people learn? I mean,
yeah,
first of all, it's just fascinating. I mean, I just find it immensely fascinating talking about ancient civilizations, which was really what drew me into the kind of Graham Hancock circle on the Joe Rogan Experience about these kinds of things. And that's actually, I'll just note here, his his basic thesis was that ancient civilizations, which were destroyed in a cataclysmic apocalyptic event, which hint the flood, but they had ancient advanced technologies, but he doesn't dig into exactly the details of the kinds of technologies that they would have had, which that's why your comments here and your Investigating Babylon series is so intriguing to me because it's like, oh, maybe we actually can know exactly the kinds of
mhm.
technologies that these ancient civilizations would have had. So again, I'll just say I highly recommend people that are interested in this subject pursue that a little bit further. Watch your full 21 part series.
Yeah, it's just it makes it also helps make the history of the Bible. Like I said before, the Bible is a spotlight focus on Israel mostly, right?
Yeah.
Abraham to Jesus. It's like it's
Hmm.
this big spotlight, but then they're interacting with Assyria and
Yeah.
Babylon,
Yep.
Egypt, the Kittim, the old school word for Greeks, the Greeks. Like they're interacting with all these people as well.
Yeah.
Um, Tyre, Tyre,
Mm.
the incredible, powerful naval merchant nation of Tyre that Ezekiel and Isaiah prophesy about and talk about, and
Mm.
Solomon got resources from
Yep.
the king of Tyre to build the temple, and like all of it's relevant, man. All of it is
Yeah,
like it's an interconnected world, and so many
it
people in
is.
church forget that.
Hmm.
And so they don't realize when, during the days of Maccabees and the Seleucids, Antiochus tries to come in and, um, I should say before the Seleucids, Antiochus tries to come in and actually destroy them in the days of the Maccabees. And you're like, okay, the Greeks, like the Greeks try to come in, the famous Greeks, like Alexander the Great, the famous history has, how many documentaries can you see on the History Channel constantly talking about Alexander the Great?
Hmm.
Um, and here we have a prophecy that is in Ezekiel that's accomplished by Alexander the Great in approximately 300 BC, which is the
Wow. Yeah.
destruction of the island nation of Tyre.
Which, side notes, one of the key aspects of Graham Hancock and his circle's work is speculations about Atlantis, which was
Mhm.
speculated to be a seafaring nation that had
Mhm.
reach all over um, the world. So
Yeah.
as you're saying this, I'm thinking, ooh, interesting. Maybe that was Tyre. But regardless, what I would
Well,
say that,
it could have been a potentially connected. Tyre, as the Bible describes it, is like where modern day Lebanon is.
yep.
And then they had a land-based city that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed,
Hmm.
but then their actual capital, which was like a mile or two off the coast on the island there, was not destroyed. And then Alexander the Great finally built a bridge
And
to it
destroyed it. Yeah.
and destroyed it. And that was a famous thing in history. And so, like right there, you've got Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great documented both in history, also in the scriptures, and Isaiah and
Mm.
Ezekiel.
Hmm.
Like there's so much correlation and relevance there.
Well,
And
that's
then you have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's exactly what I think your channel does well is it brings in that context, right? Because what I think a lot of people who have received the Bible, the Christian tradition and all of its flavors, their experience has been they're handed these texts, and they're probably not even handed all the texts that they should be handed. But in addition with these texts, they're handed this theology, this systematic of some kind that's kind of shoehorned over the top of the text, but they're not ever taught the context. Like, what is this text? Where does it come from? How does it fit into the history of the world? What are the things that I actually need to know in order to understand these texts? And again, I think you're doing a very good job at helping people to see all of that.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope to spark people to ask more questions that don't get asked in church.
Mm.
Being that, okay, so when Satan left Jesus, where'd he go?
Hmm. Yeah, where did he go?
Like just like you have those documentaries like a day in the life of celebrity, and the camera crew follows the celebrity around for a day. You're like, okay, so like if a camera crew followed around Satan that day, the day that he tempted
Yeah.
Jesus,
Where would he go?
where did he go after he left Jesus?
Yeah.
Where'd he go? Is
Yeah.
there is there a castle somewhere that he went to? Is he hanging out in some underworld, subterranean, deep underground military base in the ancient world? Like, where did he go? Well, I would say the Bible tells us that where Satan's domain is and the unclean spirit's domain is. Ephesians chapter 6, it's a word called cosmic powers, is how it's commonly translated. It's Ephesians 6:12,
Hmm.
but the word specifically is the Greek word cosmos kratos, which is basically, it by definition is the territory between the earth and the moon, which is considered the sky above or the heaven above, specifically the sky. Principalities in high places, wicked
In high
spirits of the air.
places in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So it's kind
Okay.
of there's a lot there, right? So men traverse the earth, explore the earth in every possible cave, nook, and cranny. No one's ever accidentally ran into Satan's home.
Yeah,
So
he's not on the earth, is the point.
where's he hanging out? Like, where's this?
Mm.
Like, he's clearly a part of the storyline. You know what I mean? So I just think there's a lot there without, going into too much. I know we've got other things you want to chat about, but there's just a lot there that the church is so busy with the fog machines, the new $1 million buildings, the gymnasium for the children.
Mm.
Like they're so busy with the next, like, how are we going to put like I saw recently a pastor put an entire small uh, roller coaster on stage to give his sermon, and he's literally going in circles behind the stage, back out in the front, behind the stage, sitting in a roller coaster car, giving his sermon. And you're like, bro, what are you doing? you know?
Where the church that I grew up in ended up putting a coffee bar in their foyer. And even if you get churches that aren't kind of caught up in all that kookiness, that are more Bible focused, more scripture focused, they still miss a lot of this context and a lot of
Yeah.
these questions. You know, even you get groups that kind of magnify themselves as having deep theology, but really all that it is it's just their tradition. They don't actually go very deep. It's
Yeah.
just some tradition that they've been handed from some teacher in history that doesn't actually answer all the questions or gets the questions wrong. Yeah, it's a mess. But I think what I want to do at this point, we've opened up a lot of doors that we could walk through, and I feel like what you just said and what you just introduced us to there is a perfect segue into the questions of biblical cosmology. So I feel like now would probably be a good time to start down that road. So I'll just note that this is not something I have pretty much ever really questioned, thought about. Like many people, I just grew up, went to school, read the books, watched the movies, played the games, and I'm like, well, of course, this is a globe, and space is a thing, and there's other galaxies and all this kind of stuff, right? And then recently, I was introduced to a couple people who have made an effort to discuss these issues, ask the questions, deal with the biblical texts, deal with the scientific data that's available to us, and have come to the conclusion, such as you, that the narrative that we've been handed and been fed is not correct. And again, I gotta say, like I've not really thought about this. I find from what I've surveyed from you in particular, there's not really anywhere else that I've gone to dig deep into this question of cosmology and the shape of the Earth and the nature of the quote unquote universe or all that. But from what I've been able to survey from you so far, I have to say that I appreciate your emphasis on the scriptures and what the scriptures say about the issue and what they quite clearly suggest is the case about this reality that we live in. I feel like that's for those of us who accept the truth of the biblical story all the way from the beginning through Jesus to the end. I mean, that's got to be our first place to go because we believe that these scriptures are God's revelation to us. So we've got to take what they say about whatever topic we want to think about seriously. And then I've also noticed that in addition to that sound, sober scriptural focus of yours, you've done your homework on trying to engage with the best that modern science has to offer that is leveraged against your particular view. Okay, so with all that said, I mean, just introduce us to your view here. What's the problem? What's the solution? And let's go from there.
Yeah, we don't live in a ball in space. We live in a structure. It's called a firmament. And the layers of structure that are enclosing us above us in Genesis 1, verse 8, that structure called a firmament was given the name heaven. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine a 7-story building,
Mm-hmm.
and we're on ground floor one.
Mm-hmm.
There's 6 layers above us,
Mm-hmm.
and there's 2 basements. There's Sheol and Tartarus.
Okay, got it.
So on day one, Genesis 1 1, God created the heavens and the earth.
Heavens
But then we,
plural, by the way.
the heavens, plural, that's the 6 layers above us. But then our layer and that last 7th firmament that encloses us was not yet made. That's what he then has to detail out and make in verses 2 through 8. And then it's still just a container of water with dirt inside of it that's unformed. And that's where you start getting the day by day process of how the dry land's revealed. Sun, moon, and stars are placed in that firmament, in that heaven to shine down upon the earth. The creatures are made inside the water and on the land, and then mankind's made. And so then it experiences everything we see today. That whole process, by the way, is the opposite of evolution, what evolution
Yeah, right,
teaches.
right.
So um, it's imagine a large house,
Yeah.
imagine a large house, but it's specifically the structure that encompasses us. And I say encompass specifically because that's the word the scripture uses, that the heaven encompasses us.
Hmm.
That means in circles roundabout, encompasses. So, and it encloses us, but that structure has 7 firmaments total. This is why we're told, like in Deuteronomy 10:14, that Yahweh is a God of the heaven of the heavens.
The heaven of the heavens, which would imply, given this picture you've painted, he's the God at the very top of the structure.
That's right. That's why it's called the Most High, literally.
Yeah, the Most High, literally. Yeah. Hmm.
I know people say, well, that's just reference to his authority. Sure, but just like many other Hebrew words, like the name of Yeshua means salvation,
Hmm.
right? There's a lot of things in the Hebrew that's kind of on the nose. It's pretty funny. So yeah, I would say that multiple times in Scripture, the Psalms, Deuteronomy, other places, it calls Yahweh is in the heaven of the heavens,
Hmm.
and that He looks down upon the earth, like Psalm 33 talks about, and He sees mankind as grasshoppers down upon the earth. He's looking down upon the earth because He's above us. So this is where Christ ascended to heaven
Yeah,
up.
Christ ascended. He went up. Where'd
He
he
went
go?
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christ didn't get up to 10,000 feet and then point south and then head out towards those star systems in the south, right? No, he ascended straight up
Yeah.
to the Father's house above us. And this is where there's an abundance of testimony, abundance of testimony. Um, you know, just the literal definition of the word firmament. It's Greek is the rakia, stereoma in the the Hebrew is the rakia, stereoma in the Greek. It's a word for a solid arched vaulted substance. So this
Hmm.
is the lexicons, the
Yep.
concordances, the historical definitions. This is where it gets really weird because the cognitive dissonance will kick in with a lot of modern day pastors and they want to try to redefine this word as, oh, it just means the sky and the space and solar systems. But
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
not the historical definition of the word at all.
Yeah, I've
So
experienced that. I mean, so, and I know I mentioned this to you earlier, but I recently, well, when I say recently, within the past few years, I went through the Genesis 1 classroom from the Bible Project's Tim Mackey, where he delves into the creation account of Genesis chapter 1. And he chose to translate Genesis 1 as, in the beginning, God created the skies and the land, right? And because his basic take was like, well, you have to imagine that you're an ancient Israelite who's writing this story, which, by the way, just presumes that the basis of what they're writing is not the revelation of God. It's just their own experience somehow. He's like, you have to imagine that you're just an ancient Israelite and you're looking up. And like essentially the idea is God created everything up there and everything right here. And yeah, I don't want to derail too much into all of the details of that class, but just to support your point is they don't really delve too deeply into what the scriptures have to say about the subject, or if they do, they quickly will presume the accuracy of what modern scientists tell us,
yeah,
and then go, well, okay, so that's true. Okay, so but now what do I do with all this? And often in the scriptures, particularly, and
yeah,
often what will happen is essentially because of the presumption of the truth of what they've been told by modern science, they go, okay, we have to make this fit somehow. And you get this explicitly from people like Tim Mackey, who will say that what we have to do with the scriptures is translate them given our modern realities, what we understand about reality from the modern world. Or uh, William
well,
Lane
I mean,
Craig, William Lane Craig, he'll say explicitly that what we have to do is um, essentially cohere these two sets of data that seem to stand in tension, right?
let's talk about reality.
Yeah, go.
The world says reality that we should accept is that a specific group of powerful people throughout multiple nations is going to own everything and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So the liberal economic order, it's this is why they're buying all as much real estate as they can. They want everyone to live in a pod. They want everyone to eat grasshoppers turned into grasshopper burgers, and they want everyone to not own any property, to exist on all public transportation so that you can be controlled in every way possible in your life. It has been stated publicly. It's a part of a worldwide agenda for total control on all peoples and all nations. That is their reality they're trying to paint. They call that the future reality that everyone will live in, but it's a straight up satanic lie of communism,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's their eschatology.
Let's talk about more reality where we have multiple nations across the earth engaging in abortion, to which they say is justified and is compassionate for the woman and even for the baby, because God forbid that baby be born into poverty. No one's ever born into poverty and then made something of themselves. Right, being a little rhetorically facetious here, but the point is the realities of the world are lies.
Mm,
And I would say to a brother like Tim Mackey, we need to base our definition of reality of what God says,
mm,
because God says, not to do abortion. God says that we should believe what He says about civil society, about how we have just weights and measures and administer justice for decisions about property rights, about all types of, about how we should individually live our lives in a community structure. It's all in His law. Well, God has a statement on this and what He says should be reality, but the nations would have you believe all these other realities, right? So
yeah.
they've painted a picture that they want you to believe that you live in a reality, that you're on a ball in space that is in this insignificant part of the universe, an insignificant solar system, an insignificant accident that just, from bacteria fizzing, that you somehow evolved over time to be this incredibly sentient being with a moral code that can't seem to shake,
Mm,
that's inside you. They think that you're an accident, right? That you're a meat bag just with random biological evolutionary fizzing on the inside, and that your actions don't truly matter. There's never going to be true any accountability or judgment for you, because after you
mm,
die, that's it.
mm.
And in future generations, this earth is going to die because the sun's going to go supernova in 200,000 years, and everything in the solar system is going to be dead anyway. So better race to get off this planet and go find another suitable one for us. So, like,
Isn't it?
meanwhile, the Bible says complete opposite. The Bible says
Mm,
you're fearfully and wonderfully made, that you're
mm.
special, that everything that you do matters, that you'll be judged by every word and deed, and that the end of the story, there is no doom for the earth. In fact, the earth will be rejuvenated because the Father's tabernacle comes down to live on the earth. And there's peace on the earth forevermore, and there's righteousness that reigns. The sun is always going to be in the sky, Jeremiah 33. That you don't have to fear all this doom porn that the
Ooh,
world wants to tell you,
ooh, that's
because
good.
they'll say, like, oh, this is the future reality, this is why we must colonize Mars. No, no, it's just nothing but propaganda and fear, and all of it's contrary to the promises of God in the Bible. So I struggle when, people like pastors that want to fall into this strange version of a doctrine of accommodation and say, well, that was what they were told back then, but it was really just because that's all they could understand. We now know the real reality because NASA shot up some rockets at a non-geometrical curve that doesn't match their intended path. And we should believe them and where they're going and where they said they go. And because, they can never fake that. They can never doctor a photo or an image or a video. It's all real 100% of the time.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, so because what I find fascinating about reality, let's talk reality again, is how everyone, regardless of whether they accept the Bible or not, has some kind of theology. They have some kind of belief system about fundamental reality. They have some kind of gospel that they're preaching to people, like this is the way that you need to live, and this is what you need to do. They have some kind of eschatology, like this is what's going to happen. They have some kind of apocalyptic future in view that we're supposed to avert. Like if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. But what's the truth? Like, what's the true gospel? And I love, you basically articulated it to a certain extent, but I would love to just have you directly address the question that is at the heart of what you do, right? Your channel is called Kingdom in Context for a reason, because
Mm-hmm.
the truth is the gospel of the kingdom,
Yeah.
which is lost on a lot of Christians. I mean, you ask them what the kingdom is and they probably couldn't even answer. And I don't say that facetiously. I just say that because that's where we are. That's where we are in human history, is that most people who read this Bible, like just they've been duped, they've been misled, they've been lied to, they've been kept from seeing the truth. So anyway, yeah, tell us like all that the world is offering us, we know is lies, but the Father offers us the truth, and the truth that He decided to give us through His Son was the so-called gospel of the kingdom. What is that?
Yes. Yeah. It's basically, like I said, the Father's house is going to come down to the earth.
Hmm.
And so therefore it's a physical reality. It's a real place. Like Hebrews 11 says, verses 10 through 16, that Abraham looked for a city whose architect and builder is God. And it's considered also a heavenly country in those passages. In First Corinthians, I think it's chapter 5, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul calls it a building reserved in heaven for us.
Mm.
Revelation 21 calls it the New Jerusalem, the tabernacle of God, the dwelling place of God descending down out of heaven, a place with streets and walls and foundation stones. The river of life is in there. The throne of God is in there. Revelation 21 and 22 are all the same story.
Hmm.
The throne of God is in there. The river of life flows out there. There's fruit, animals, land, trees, mountains. It's called the mountain of God in Isaiah chapter 2. It's called
Hmm.
the it's called the city of God. Isaiah, it's called the city of righteousness. The Lord dwells there. Isaiah 62. It's the promise of the kingdom come, like
That's
Jesus taught us to pray.
that's my Father's house that has many rooms. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When he said he'd come receive us back again to himself,
Hmm.
that's the place where we'll be received unto after the resurrection. Is the Father's house that descends out of heaven and sits down on the earth between the Euphrates and the Nile, which is the land promised to Abraham,
Hmm.
that he and his descendants would live there forever. So this obviously assumes the resurrection, because that's how
Hmm.
you and your descendants can live there forever. Um, it's because you have to be given eternal life. You're made alive again, which is the promise of the covenant.
Hmm.
And so the dwelling place, it's also Isaiah 54:17 and Revelation 21:7. It says that this city of God is the inheritance
Hmm.
of the saints of God.
Hmm. That's the inheritance
Yeah.
that we have been given the earnest of through Messiah by the Spirit. Yes.
Yeah. So we've been given the like just like Romans 8, where he talks about where um we are co-heirs with Christ,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So Christ is already, because he's already been received his resurrection body and ascended to heaven. He's the first fruits of us. He's the forerunner. He has already received that inheritance. That's why he's preparing a place for us inside that inheritance. But we have not yet. This is why we await the resurrection with hope. Paul in Romans 8 calls it our blessed hope, because on the day of the resurrection is when we're actually taken up into the New Jerusalem as it's still slowly descending out of heaven. This is what in the gospel, in the parables of the sower, this is what Christ is talking about in Matthew 13:33, that the angels take the wheat into the barn. So we're not the tares, we're the wheat, because we're the faithful children of God. So that's why on that day, the wheat is gathered and taken up into the barn. But yet the barn is actually
It's
descending out of
coming
heaven.
back. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's the beautiful
That's what
story.
that's why Paul says in First Thessalonians 4, I believe it is, where he talks about the trump will sound, and then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with those who have risen out of the grave. We'll meet
Yeah.
the Lord in the air because that's we're meeting him to descend to the earth with him.
Yeah. He's coming back with a bunch of angels to do judgment.
Hmm.
Isaiah 26:19 through 21, we're birthed from the earth, we're resurrected, and then we're taken into our rooms to avoid the indignation of the Lord. So while the battle
Oh,
of
okay.
Armageddon's happened, while the all the judgments are happening with the seven bowl judgments and everything's happening on the earth, we're being taken away from all that chaos into the city that's slowly descending out of heaven. And then that's giving time for the Son and all the angels to destroy the wicked, the first and second beast, wrap Satan in that chain, the kings of the earth, all the armies trying to fight, like take care of all that stuff while we're still descending out of heaven.
Got
To
it.
all my research, it seems to be approximately 7 days. It may take longer, but my first working theory is that it takes approximately 7 days for the New Jerusalem to descend out of heaven, and that's when the millennial reign starts. And this is where I have a different view than other people. Some people say that the New Jerusalem descends out of heaven after the millennial reign. But the reason why I don't think that is because of all the verses that describe the New Jerusalem as the house of God, in which all the nations come to interact with it and bring their
Hmm.
wealth and glory into it, and are taught the
Hmm.
law of God and have to keep the feast of God and interact with it and camp around it.
Hmm.
And they're given free food and water from it. And so the day of the Lord events is cataclysmic destruction on the earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's going to be millions upon millions of refugees from all nations that need free food, water, and medicine. And this is what the city does. The dissension of the city is not just so the Father can show out and say, look at this incredible city that I have and I've made for my people who are righteous and faithful, but for those who didn't make the resurrection, that are still a part of mortal mankind amongst the nations who have lost their homes. Revelation 16:18 says, on that day, there's a great earthquake that destroys all the cities of the nations. Like that's a major earthquake. So then all those people are going to be coming to the city of God for refuge. And
So
that refuge,
you don't locate what you're describing here with the city of God providing refuge to the nations. You don't locate that within the so-called millennial kingdom. You locate that within the so-called new heavens and new earth.
it's all the same.
It's
So
all the
that
same in your view.
in
Okay.
in Revelation 21 verses 1 and 2, when it talks about the new heavens and the new earth that John
Mm-hmm.
is looking up to see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Because it's
remember
coming
he's
down.
because it's coming down.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Greek, that word new is the word kainos. It's not the word neos. It's the word kainos, which can speak to something that is being renovated or refashioned, right? Something that previously exists but has been renovated. So the kingdom of God, the place that Christ went to go prepare for us, he's
Yep.
renovating it.
Okay.
He's refashioning it. It used to be the Garden of Eden. So this Trey is where a lot of
Mm.
people don't really get into the fullness of this conversation and ask the big questions. Again, at church, they
Yeah.
they they don't ask the big questions. Where'd the Garden of Eden go?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or if they do ask the question, they'll just answer it by, well, that was just symbolic or whatever. Or, oh, that didn't actually happen. Or, yeah. So go ahead. What is the way that you
So
view
in,
that?
in Revelation 2 and Revelation 22, it refers to the paradise of God.
Hmm.
This is also in Second Corinthians chapter 12, 1 through 3. Paul talks about in the third heaven, the third firmament, the paradise of God, right? It is That's where the Garden of Eden went. So this is why, like in Genesis
Fascinating.
3, after Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden and sent back to the land of their creation, and then an angel with the flashing sword was sent to guard the way to the tree of life, so that Adam and Eve and any future descendants cannot get back into the Garden of Eden, which where was the tree of life at the time, right?
Right, right.
So that means the Garden of Eden was still on the ground.
At that point in time, absolutely. Yeah.
So you could walk up and see an angel guarding the way.
Hmm.
You could see the garden, but you can't get in.
Right,
And then the Hebrew, the word garden means a walled off structure or enclosure.
right. Like a
This is why
city
the word,
almost.
oh, yeah. So the word paradise is in the Greek is also the word for garden in the Hebrew. So this is where you're like, oh, why didn't they just say in Revelation 2 and 22, it's the garden of God? Why do they call it the paradise of God? It just little stuff like that causes
Yeah.
confusion to the average,
Right.
unless you start digging in and start looking up, all right, what's this Greek word and all that, right?
So the paradise of God, the Garden of Eden, was on the earth, but after the sin of man, it was relocated up into the third heaven. That's the point you're making. And then
I
that's
in my
okay.
studies, it seems to be from Isaiah 49 and 54, seems to be describing that the garden of God was taken up after it was flooded with the flood and then taken up.
Okay. So at some point in there, it was taken off the earth and it was relocated into the third heaven. And that is the literal kingdom of God, the city of
Mhm,
God that Jesus is renovating, that will
mhm.
then descend out of the heavens to the earth.
That's why Isaiah 54 talks about it. It says, enlarge your tent pegs, extend your boundaries so that you may dispossess the nations, right? So if you're sitting a big city down that's approximately 1,500 square miles and it's sitting down between the Euphrates and the Nile, that's going to dispossess a lot of current nations living there, right? People are
Hmm.
so worried about Israel and Gaza. Y'all ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till the house of God starts descending out of the house. Like
That's
people are going to be
hilarious.
wanting to get out of their nation, right? Because but this is actually what Matthew 13:49 talks about. The angels, they go off and they actually remove and separate the wicked and the righteous. They're actually removing people from the area. They're going to cleanse the land. There's a whole bunch of passages that describe the entire process, as far as how they prep the area and the land for the house of God to sit down,
Mm.
and it's all done very mercifully and lovingly. So, except for
Unless
the
they're
people
unless
that
they
don't want it
they
to happen,
resist. Yeah.
right? The armies that try to fight Christ at this coming, they're going to get some smoke, but they're going to be turned into smoke, I should say. But that's where the innocent, if I could put it like that, those who are considered sheep in the Matthew sheep and goats judgment, they're going to be spared. They're actually going to be removed from that area so that the city can set down. But the city is described as a place that is in Isaiah 54 is a place that's being enlarged.
Mm.
So it's not going to be the same size as the Garden of Eden because you have more inhabitants than just Adam and Eve. You're going to have all
Right.
these potentially hundreds of millions of resurrected saints who inherit it. So it needs
Wow.
to be a much bigger place. That's why it's given human dimensions in Revelation 21,
Mm.
verse 17. The
Mm.
angel shows John with human measurements.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is the part where I ask pastors when I interview them on my channel and say, is Revelation 21 figurative or literal?
I was literally just about to say, because this is a perennial debate, right? Literalism versus symbols and all that. And My dad, he was actually the first person that I interviewed for this project that I'm doing on the Theology Experience. He's the episode number one. Him and I talked about this, but he recommended a book to me years ago, and it's something like I can't forget the title. It's something about this is totally the wrong title, but it's something like essentially the heresy of biblical literalism. Okay. In other words, there's something very, very wrong with reading the Bible literally. Like that's the point. And so, yeah, this is just a perennial debate about, oh, what do you take literally? What do you take non-literally and all that. So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's um, most pastors I ask, they really can't answer the question, and
Mm,
that's sad, right?
mm,
Because they'll be like, well, it's a highly debated concept. I'm like, all right, well, if it's if it's a metaphor, it's a figurative. If it's supposed to represent something else, then where's the cipher so that we can interpret it?
mm. Yeah, how do you discern between what's literal and what you're not supposed to take literal? It's a huge question.
Because all the details provided in that chapter, you would need a whole nother chapter of equal size for the interpretation, if not three times the size for the interpretation to be explained. So in the book of Revelation itself, in chapter 17, verse, I think it's 8 through 11, it gives you an interpretation from something previous in the book of Revelation. It tells you who the first beast is and where he came from. He's
Mm,
the he was of the seven, but he's the eighth, and he's the one that comes up out of the pit. Oh, I saw somebody come up out of the pit in Revelation 9. His name was Apollyon. Oh, that's the beast whom the kings give their power to for 1 hour. Interesting. That seems easy. Oh, isn't he also mentioned in Revelation 11, where he's the one at the end of the 42 months of the two witnesses and their prophesying? He then gets to kill them. Oh, okay. So, like, you start to piece together. Okay, so I don't have to be. And it also says in Revelation 11, the beast who came up out of the pit. You're like, okay. So it's the same beast in chapter 9, chapter 11, chapter 13, and chapter 17. He's going to be killed in chapter 19 by Christ that is coming. So, like, okay, so I see this book is interpreting itself. It's going out of its
mm,
way to
mm.
give us an explanation for something that John Saul didn't quite understand previously. But yet, here we get to chapter 21, and it just states everything without any apology, just states
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Here's the tabernacle coming down out of heaven. Here's the dimensions. Here's the gates of it that are after the names of the tribes of Israel. Here's the foundation stones after the apostles. Here's the dimensions, literal and human measurement dimensions. Here's, by the way, there's no that word temple in verse 22 is the word naos, which is the word for holy holies,
Right.
because the Almighty and the Son are already there because it's the Father's house. Because the Father's a real entity with a real corporeal form.
Ooh, boom. We're gonna get to that. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
So
then it goes on to say there's no need for the sun and moon inside this city. Now, outside the city, the sun and moon will still be on people will still see it on the earth. But inside the city, it's illumined by the power of God, and the sun is the lamp. And then it says all the nations of verse 27 will come to it and bring their glory into it, which means their wealth. We see that in First Enoch chapter 52 and 54.
and
All the
Isaiah
nations
as well.
and in Isaiah 60 and 61, all the nations come before and they bow down and they give their wealth and bring their wealth into it, animals and resources and gold, silver, tin, all that kind of stuff.
Mm,
And this is why there's peace on the earth, because
mm.
here's the central point of power. The house of God is here, is dwelling on the earth forever. So this is like an incredible concept. Like, if you understand the creation model, where previously in the story, the Father lived at the top, and we're at the quote unquote bottom, if you will, of the seven layers of the firmament. And but after the coming of the kingdom of God into forever, the Father is going to live here with us. Like, we get to like,
Mm,
we, as in like the earth realm, gets to experience the Father's glory, majesty, and house, where
mm.
previously the angels in heaven got to, right? And then also at the resurrection, which are the people who inhabit that house, the resurrected mankind is resurrected in a higher place of authority than the angels,
Right.
which is amazing,
Hmm.
because now the elder serves the younger, and the last are made first.
Mm.
And the central point of us being ministering servants under the Melchizedek order under Christ to the Father, we get to live inside of his house with him. We're like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a beautiful story, man.
It
And this
is.
is
It
why I
is.
actually interpret Luke 15's prodigal son story to be about the angels and mankind. the older brother would be the angels, and the wayward brother would be mankind. And
Mm.
so I don't think it's about the two sticks. I don't think it's about, like, I personally, I just see the metaphor being, the elder brother's responsibility, the expected obedience of the angels for them to be faithful to the Father, and in gratitude for their position in creation, is that they are ministers to us. Hebrews 1:14, that they're sent out to be
Exactly. Yep.
ministers to those who are inheriting salvation. They already have salvation. They already
Yeah.
have eternal bodies, and they already have the presence of the Father live there. That's
Mhm.
all the things promised to us. They already have it, but then they have to send to help us who are down here flailing in our sin and blindedness, right? To help us to get to where they are. And that's the faithful responsibility that they're supposed to carry out, that approximately 200 of them rejected and didn't do. Instead, turned to attack us,
Yeah.
right? This is why their judgment is so severe. To whom much is
Exactly.
given, much is expected. So,
It reminds me, you bring up the Luke 15 parable of the prodigal son along these lines, and it also reminds me of another parable that Jesus told about the laborers, who some of them had started earlier in the day
right.
and worked, but then some had come in later, and the ones who had been working longer were upset about that. They were like,
Yeah.
"Hey, what's up with this? These guys coming in at the end of the day and they're getting the same reward as us. That's not fair." And God says, "It's exactly fair. This is what we agreed to." But yeah, it seems like that's probably working a similar theme.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why the angels are, I mean, Revelation 19, the angel says to John, I'm your brother.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? He's like,
Hmm.
hey, don't bow to me, bow to God. I'm your brother in this thing.
Which is activates the sons of God theme throughout the scriptures, right? Which of course was
Yeah.
we all know that spiritual beings were called the sons of God, and then a huge part of the uh, Pauline theology is recognizing that just as Israel is a son of God, so are the Gentiles who are coming in, their sons as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And
Fascinating
those,
stuff. Oh, go ahead.
first John 3:9, those who are born of God do
They are
not
the
sin,
yeah.
right? Because I see that particular passage speaking about us, the promise of us at the resurrection. That's how we're actually, the moments that we're born. I know that the colloquial usage of, being born again is their conversion, but
Well, there's a
I think
first
it's
fruits.
literal. I'm
Well,
going to
there's a
fall into the heresy of literality there and say
right.
we're literally born again because we're
Mm,
given new bodies with new
mm.
hearts and minds with his law in it, and all of our previous record of sin is no more. There's no more
Yeah.
atoning. It's actually been removed from us at the resurrection. We're born of God. We will never sin again. We get to live in his house with him because we're children of God. So, yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think you're right. I would just note that I think a couple key concepts come into play in the scriptures, namely the notion of first fruits, and also
Mm-hmm.
something we talked about earlier, where Paul refers to us as having received the earnest or the down payment or the
Mm-hmm.
deposit of our inheritance. So there's some theologians
Yeah,
have
is that
cashed that.
Ephesians 1, right?
Yeah, they've cashed this out in many different ways. Some people will talk about it as like an already not yet reality. I prefer to stick to the biblical terms of like the first fruits or the down payment. So yes, you're right that I think, when we talk about things like the new birth or the new covenant or the new heavens and the new earth, things like that, there's a future substantive reality that's being referred to, but there is also a sense in which right now, those who are in the Spirit, those who are in Messiah, they have the first fruits of that, right? They have the down payment or the earnest of the inheritance of that. They just don't have its full reality yet until the resurrection and the coming of the new heavens and the new earth.
Yeah, which is why I lovingly try to remind my OSAS free grace friends that the angels already have the salvation we look forward to, and even some of them can reject it and be destroyed in the lake of fire.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
So there is like, and of course, it's all how you define the semantics, how you define salvation within that particular crowd. They believe the moment of cognitive mental assent, you have eternal life somehow, unverifiably,
Mm-hmm.
without any type of demonstrable able to witness it or quantify it. They believe you already have that eternal life, and your spirit is already considered in heaven at that point, because you mentally believed in the gospel, and nothing that you do in the flesh can possibly take that away from you after that. But then I just
Hey,
point to the angels, and I'm like, but
exactly.
the angels, man, like
Yeah.
they were in heaven, they rebelled.
And they were
God
kicked
says
out.
they're going to be destroyed in the lake of fire. Like,
Exactly.
bro, they lost their salvation. It's pretty obvious.
Plus, in the scriptures, the Exodus from Egypt is kind of like the paradigmatic salvation story. It's the first story in the scriptures, actually, reading it in the traditional order, Genesis, Exodus, and so on. It's the first place where we get the terminology of
Mm-hmm.
salvation and redemption. It's very paradigmatic, and the author of Hebrews here picks up on this, and he says, some of those that were saved, those were that were delivered out of Egypt. It was those people. It was some of those people who fell in the wilderness because of their disobedience and their unbelief. Right.
Yeah.
So very clearly, having been saved is no guarantee of being saved in the future.
Right.
you
Right.
you have to endure to the end, as Jesus said.
That's why I love things. First Timothy 4. Paul talks about these are the scriptures that you've had since your youth. Speaking of Timothy,
Mm.
he says these are the scriptures that you've had since your youth, which can make you wise for salvation.
Yes, yes. So that you know good and evil in
Mm-hmm.
God's way, not in the way of the evil spiritual beings, so that you can lead yourself and others properly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame that Paul gets attacked so much. My wife and I have joked in the past to say like, man, like we want to make T-shirts that say "Poor Moses," like the stuff he had to put up with and deal with, like, and then also poor Paul.
Oh, for real.
Dude, like Acts 21, he's dealing with the slander against his character and his ministry. He's still dealing with the same accusation 2,000 years later.
What's amazing to me about that, brother, is despite exactly what is explicitly, very clearly put forward in Acts chapter 21 about Paul publicly demonstrating that the charges were false,
Yeah,
you will still have theologians say, actually, it was true, and he was just
right.
like lying. Like what?
They pull
It's
up First
insane.
Corinthians 9 and they'll say,
Yeah,
well,
right.
remember over here, he said, to the Jews, act like a Jew, but to the, like, so that he was being duplicitous with everybody. Because I'm pretty sure I see in the book of Romans, he says, we uphold the law. He says, if we walk by the Spirit, then we're obedient to the law. He
Exactly.
says in Romans 14 that the kingdom of God abides in the law, that fulfillment, loving people is fulfillment of the law in chapter
And that's
13.
and that's just
Like,
not a yeah, and that's just not at all what First Corinthians 9 means when he talks about to
right.
the Jews I became as a Jew. And actually something you mentioned earlier about the kind of whatever Peter did that caused Paul to be so angry at him. This is highly relevant because in Galatians chapter 2 he talks about you who don't even live like a Jew, you live like a Gentile.
Yeah.
All of a sudden now you're going to live like a Jew again and expect Gentiles to live like Jews. That's key. He's not talking about being obedient to the commandments of the law of Moses. He's talking about living according to Jewish traditions, like the
Right.
ones you mentioned earlier, where Peter had to have um, a vision from God to help him realize that these Jewish traditions that were separating between Jew and Gentile were not from God; they were from
Yeah.
men. That's what he's talking about there. Yeah, I agree with you. And actually, part of my own personal journey is the reckoning with Paul and reconciling him with Jesus. Because
Mhm.
in 2022, I went through a period of time, and I've already talked about this in prior episodes, so I don't want to just kind of rehash the same thing over and over again. But just for your awareness, I went through a period of intense doubt centered on what it seemed to me to obviously be incoherence between Jesus and Paul. Because Jesus, you've got Matthew 19, if you want to enter life, keep the commandments. You've got Matthew 5, 17 through 20, you need to do and teach others to do the commandments of the law, or else you're not going to make it into the kingdom. And then you've got apparently Paul saying the exact opposite. Oh, and also like if you do try to obey the law, then you're not going to get into the kingdom. It's like what? Yeah. So the past 3 years really has been primarily me coming to grips with what I think is the truth about Paul, which is that he was a Torah observant Jew who was teaching both Jews and Gentiles to obey the law of Moses.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he's just been wildly misunderstood.
Yeah. In fact, in my, we're not only doing just the book of Enoch, I'm doing like all the books of scripture.
Oh wow,
So we've already
nice.
done 17 so far.
Oh wow.
And I've done like First, Second Thessalonians, Romans, Galatians, James. I've done a bunch of the New Testament books, and so as I don't know if you've ever taken a look at this, but part of the second column that I do, you can't really see it, but the
Nah.
second column. So there's text on one side, and then there's two columns over here. There's my commentary
Mm-hmm.
as well as supporting scriptures in these other two columns
Mm-hmm.
across from the text, right? And so, I go through Paul's writings, and I haven't done First, Second Corinthians yet. I need to finish those, but I point out the thematic concepts of what he's talking about.
Yes.
Like here
Good.
he's talking about the resurrection, here he's talking about the law of God, here he's talking about the covenants, here he's talking, and those are the themes. That's why it's color coded according to those themes. And so I get to point out all the places that Paul is constantly talking about how he is 100% doing the commandments of God everywhere and all times, and how people who reject them will be judged. Um, and you could just go through and start counting. Like, okay, First Corinthians 5, he's talking about a law that was forbidden in Leviticus 20 about intersexual relation with a mother and daughter or mother and son. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
is the
Right.
law done away with? Why is he
Clearly
chastising
not.
that person? Right.
I've even
So
had, what's really powerful, I think, about First Corinthians 5 is that even though you can finally get some people who think Paul was a anti-Torah person, you can get them to realize that in Acts chapter 15, the so-called four prohibitions that were placed upon the Gentiles were directly from the law of Moses, one of them being
yeah,
sexual immorality, right? Even then, you'll get some people who are like, yeah, but that was just like a concession for the time, and like the goal was ultimately greater freedom. It's like, wait a second, hold on. 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is threatening expulsion for this guy who violated one of the Torah's prohibitions about sexual immorality.
yeah,
Expulsion from the community in 1 Corinthians 5. That's what's happening there. So
yeah,
no, this is just it's just nonsense at this point in time. It's just so obviously nonsense. People think that Paul or Jesus or anyone else in the New Testament was preaching against the law of Moses or against observing the law of Moses. Here's the key um, that I like to root these things in these days is like, okay, let's go, Christian theologian that I'm talking to today. Let's go with what you're saying. Jesus and Paul were teaching people to disobey the law of Moses. Okay. God told us in the law of Moses to consider people who did that to be false prophets
right.
and to run away from them as fast as we can. And actually, that's my paraphrase. What it actually tells you to do is kill them.
Stone them. Yeah.
But we shouldn't be listening
Let
to
your
them.
hand show mercy. Pick up the stone. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 13. We shouldn't be listening to them if that's the case. And that was the heart of my struggle in 2022 was like, how can I listen? How can I think that there's coherence here if Paul is actually teaching disobey or just don't try to obey the law of Moses, but Jesus is teaching it. And by the way, God was teaching it through Moses. It just doesn't make sense. It seems to me like we should reject Paul at that point if that's true.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly right. If that is true, if Paul is teaching those things, then he should be rejected. And as you know, I'm sure there are plenty of people who have faith in Messiah who reject Paul because of this misunderstanding.
Yeah.
In
It's
my
sad.
opinion, and it is sad because there's so much good in Paul once you properly understand him, once you bring the context that you're
Yeah.
mentioning to
In
bear.
fact, it's even in Galatians 2:10 where he said, only thing that John and Peter encouraged me to do is remember the poor, the very thing which I was eager to do. That's Deuteronomy 15.
Exactly. Yes, James, the one who in Acts chapter 21 was so concerned to make sure that people didn't think that Paul was preaching against the law of Moses, he fully agreed with the gospel that Paul preached, according to Paul in Galatians chapter 2. So you can't tell me that Paul was preaching an anti-Torah gospel.
No, he wasn't.
James would not have approved of him if he was.
No. Yeah, they would have. I mean, that, yeah, it was that the Acts 21 moment is like years, a decade or more after he'd already been accepted and it was
Hmm.
a part of the squad. You know
Right.
what I mean? He's out doing his evangelistic mission journeys and everything, and
Yeah.
it's decade after he converted. So, um, yeah, it's so much slander. It's the
It really
enemy, right?
is.
It's the
It
enemy
is.
just confusing people. I had a pastor several years ago at my channel that I was interviewing, and he's out of Washington State, and
Hmm.
he said we were talking about Paul, and that he, of course, bringing up the cliche verses and everything, and how we're oh no, Jesus didn't do away with the law; he just raised the bar. Now it's not even just no adultery. Now it's can't even look with lust. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Job 31 said, "I made a covenant with my eye that I will not look lustfully on a woman." And I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure, like, we're told not to look on the nakedness of Leviticus 18 through 20 of your
Exactly.
neighbor's wife or child. Like, pretty sure
And
lust is covered, bro.
it
But
is, yeah, that whole narrative is just nonsense. I mean,
yeah,
all that needs to be done there is you just have to walk through each section of the Sermon on the Mount because that's where this comes from, usually.
yeah,
This comes from the Sermon on the Mount where it's like, oh, Jesus says, "You have heard it said, don't murder, but I tell you, don't be angry." And you get this misunderstanding of like what's going on there. Jesus is not intensifying or adding to the law in any way. He's actually expositing the law and the prophets. You can see
Yeah,
this because, for example, in Leviticus chapter 19, the same passage that says, love your neighbor, says, don't bear a grudge in your heart against your neighbor.
that's right.
And also in Exodus chapter 20, where it says, don't murder, it also says, do not covet, or in the Greek translation that we have in English, don't lust after your neighbor's wife.
Right.
So he's just not doing this
Yeah.
to.
So I asked the same pastor, I was like, well, because he was also going to those some of those passages and talked about, well, Jesus said to love your enemies, and that's not in the Old Testament. And I was like, bro,
Yes, it
Leviticus
is.
19, 17 and
Exactly.
18, Proverbs 25, like let's go
Yes.
down the list, right?
I mean, all they're
Exodus
doing,
22, like if your
yeah,
enemy's animal, you can't mistreat your enemy's animal. Like you've got to show
right.
love to even your enemy's animal, bro. Like
Exactly.
so it's a bad paradigm. Later in that conversation though, I asked the pastor, I said, because he started talking about the new covenant, and he's like, well, oh yeah, the law's already on my heart, I'm in the new covenant.
Oh man.
And I was like, okay, well, interesting, so the law's already on your heart. I was like, what's Leviticus 19:11, which is the one that says do not lie, right? And I was kind of being a little facetious here because I was like, all right, so he's lying to me, he just doesn't realize it.
Right.
But let me see if he knows what Leviticus 19:11 is, right? And he's like, well, how am I supposed to know? I don't know what that is. And I'm like, oh, so it's not on your heart then.
Mm.
And he was like, well, that sure is a arbitrary way to argue that. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, it's, you said the law's in your heart. That means you would know it, right? That's the promise of the new covenant, is that it's on your heart and mind so that you faithfully carry it out. Ezekiel
Mhm.
36, Jeremiah
Mhm.
33 or 31. He's like, yeah, but that's not what that means. I'm like, okay. So when I say a specific law that I know what it is, but you don't know what it is, I only know what it is because I memorized it. But you don't even know what it is. How is it on your heart? How can you do it if you don't even know what it is?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So just little stuff like that. It's just it's an ongoing battle that we're
it
in as
is.
far
It
as
is.
the maintaining an act of tenderness and softness toward those who are deeply deceived while trying to reach them with the truth. But also standing the ground
Yeah,
for
yeah.
what the Bible clearly says, you know?
Amen. Yeah, and with regard to that, I know that, what we said earlier needs to be remembered about the kind of, again, you could call it, already not yet, or first fruits, down payment versus the fulfillment. That needs to be kept in mind because in Romans chapter 2, Paul talks about Gentiles who do what the law requires, right? And they show, therefore, that what the law requires is written on their hearts. So
Mhm.
there's a sense in which we can talk about people who do what the law requires as having the law written on their hearts. But there is a future fulfillment of that is uh, spoken about in those very prophecies to which he's appealing, where it's so powerful and it's so pervasive that you don't even need anyone to teach you anymore, uh, because everybody just does it. Nobody needs to be taught it, which is obviously not the reality today. And so that's why we talk about, the difference between the first fruits and the down payment versus what's going to come later. But I just, people
Yeah,
have this real,
if we didn't have to, like, if the law was on our heart to the point as described in Ezekiel and
yeah,
Jeremiah, why do we have pastors, teachers, and
exactly.
all that stuff? Like, it's,
Yeah,
why are we told to be studying and proving the word? Why are we told to know these scriptures to make you wise for salvation? Why
exactly, exactly.
why would any of this be necessary? Like, it would just
Yep.
be, oh, I believe in Christ and boom, I'm done. And now I'm walking in perfect discipleship and I don't need to learn it and study. I don't have to confess my sin. First John 1:8 would be out the window completely.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
nobody would have sin. Nobody would be called a liar for saying they don't have sin. Like, it would just be, we would be in complete fellowship with God already. Right. But that's
Right.
only promised at the resurrection.
We're clearly not there yet. What we are in is in the process essentially of writing
Mhm.
the law on our hearts, which is a process. I mean, this is something I feel like people just totally miss because frankly they're not very familiar with the scriptures. As Jesus said to people, you neither know the scriptures nor the power of God, because it talks explicitly in the scriptures about both God by his spirit writing his law on our hearts, circumcising our hearts, and us circumcising our hearts, writing the law of God on our hearts. In other words, it's a process of walking in the spirit of
Yeah.
God, through repentance and through discipline and through instruction and all of these things until the coming of the new heavens and the new earth, of actually writing that law on our hearts.
Yeah. It's a beautiful process. It is discipleship and sanctification.
Exactly.
And as I don't agree with everything that Irenaeus said, but I do believe that he got it right in a demonstration of apostolic preaching in the first couple of stanzas, where he says that this is the rule of our faith, keeping the commandments.
Mm. Hmm.
Like that's
I,
just that simple.
not Ezekiel, I'm sorry, Ecclesiastes 12:14 that you already, or 12:13 that you already quoted earlier, right? Fear
Yeah,
God, keep his commandments.
yeah. So we're dealing with people clearly, like you've already stepped into this realization, this type of study.
Hmm.
I did, a decade ago. Other people have done it much earlier than I have. Like Matthew Jansen's been following Torah for
Since the
10,
90s.
yeah, since the 90s. So
Yeah.
now this is why I tell people on our channel, because unfortunately we run into a lot of cage stage Torah observant folks,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So they're
mm,
they're still in that condemnation stage of like, oh, if you're not keeping the festivals, the feasts, the zeets, the dietary, then you're rejecting God, you're rejecting Christ, you're a heathen, you're of the ways of the nation, which is false, right? It's
mm,
they're still just like I was. I know because I lived it. I
mm.
was sincerely desiring to know God, to walk with
Yes.
God. I just never,
Yes.
no one was telling me what that meant. And
It's like Apollo. Yeah.
yes, but I was going to the mainstream churches. I was not getting tutelage there. I was voraciously reading my Bible, trying to figure it out on my own and praying to God for wisdom and understanding to try to figure this out. And for whatever reason, he decided until 2014 to step me into that understanding. He could have done it in 2002, right? But he didn't. He'd let me continue to ask, seek, and knock.
Mm.
And I think that there is so many other people out there just like that are,
Amen.
I believe we're in this great revival that's not televised, it's unseen. It's like he's silently through his spirit calling to mind the commandments everywhere we're scattered into the heaven. I feel like we're in the fulfillment of Deuteronomy chapter 31 through 10, and it culminates in the resurrection, right? But this process has started already, that everywhere we're scattered, we're calling to mind the commandments. And so basically that's different for everybody. Everyone's on a different learning curve.
Right.
So we're not all coming to the same understanding at the exact same time. And so we have to be tender and loving to all those out there that are wanting to know God. They are professing Christ. They're not professing Krishna or Baal or Zeus.
Mm.
They're professing Christ.
Yeah.
And even the most ignorant of Christians in history have been martyred, persecuted for
Mm,
professing Christ, and they didn't
mm,
know any theology. So,
mm.
like, this
I
is
mean,
where I
the
try to
thief on the
remind
cross, right?
yeah,
Is an
yeah,
example, right? The thief on the cross was put on the cross because he was a sinner. Let's just be honest with that, guys. He was
yeah,
there for not good reasons, and yet his heart was apparently for we don't know the story. All we know is that he sees this Jesus guy hanging next to him and believes, and Jesus says, "Hey, I see faith in you. You're coming to the kingdom with me." Like
yeah.
that's
Yeah, you'll be in paradise with me. You'll be in the
yeah,
garden of God with me. You know what I
yeah.
mean? So like that's the interesting part is like he didn't Christ didn't spend that 6 hours on the cross explaining the Trinity to the dude, right? Being like, now I want to make
Oh
sure you
man.
understand because if you don't affirm all this, you're not gonna. Now, what does homoousion mean? Do you understand? Like he didn't do all that. He didn't make him profess, any specific creed. He just simply was like, "Oh, I tell you today, you'll be with me in paradise." Like,
Because
oh,
he obviously saw exactly what Psalm 103 says God honors. Psalm
mhm,
103 says that God understands that we are dust, we sin, and he says he's not always angry, he's compassionate and he's merciful. He will not always be angry. He does not always treat us the way that our sins deserve. He is merciful toward those who fear him.
mhm,
In other words, wherever any individual human is on their journey, whatever confusion that they may have, as long as God can see that they have a heart that fears Him, that is repentant for their sin, that is striving, that wants to, desires, and is doing what they know to do, as James says,
mhm,
then God honors that. God is that's how merciful and gracious our Heavenly Father is. And I feel like, these kind of these foils that you're presenting about, like, well, did he teach him the Trinity on the cross, is a perfect example of the way that humans just royally screw this up. Like we
yeah,
just impose our traditions on people, which really gets to the issue that in the scriptures discusses righteous versus unrighteous judgment, right? Judgment
right,
according to the truth and what is righteous in the eyes of God versus judgment according to whatever dogmas we may have developed in our
Yeah.
traditions or what have you.
It's Romans 14:4. Who you judge another servant of the master. So
Exactly.
yeah, that thief on the cross, he was repentant. I mean, he's
Yeah.
defending Christ from being mocked from the other thief on the
Hmm.
other side. And he says, this man has done nothing wrong, but we're up here because we deserve what we're getting. We're up here because we're sent. We deserve
Wow.
it. So like he's defending God, or he's
Wow.
defending Christ, I should say, the Son of God. He's admitting that he's a sinner. He's showing humility,
Mm.
and he's saying he deserves the punishment he's getting, and then he begs for mercy and salvation to the
Wow.
judge, the
Wow.
actual judge. So like, of course, Christ is like, this dude. I'm surprised. I'm surprised Christ is clearly near death at this point, so he may not have a lot of energy. But it reminds me of the other time when Christ said, "Whoa, I've not found such faith in all of Israel." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like, here's this guy,
Wow.
dying breath through the pain. He's defending Christ from being mocked, and he's is admitting he deserves it, and he's asking for mercy at the feet of the judge. So it's crazy, man.
It's a beautiful story, and it's really kind of hitting me anew right here. It's like how far exactly into your sin can God's mercy apply to you? It's like, oh, how about
Yeah.
like being crucified and about to die? How about that far? Like God is able to meet you if you have a humble heart and fear
Well, here's
Him.
the crazy part,
And
Trey.
yeah,
That thief exhibits that he had some sense of awareness. What does he say to Christ? He says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom."
yeah, he had some
When
knowledge.
did
Yeah.
Christ explain to him he's the Messiah and he's going to come back and he's going to rule over the house of God, which is the kingdom of God, and he's going to rule over all nations? And like, when did he explain that to him?
Mm.
Right. So clearly, this guy had some previous. He's been to church previously, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right. He's
Right.
been to synagogue previously.
He's a
He'd heard
prodigal
from
son.
he's from somewhere, somehow he heard about the Messiah's coming to rule over the nations,
Mm.
had the kingdom that the Messiah rules over. And but yet here he is, a thief who's dying for his crimes and his sins, but yet he's had some church in him at some point,
Mm. Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And he's, now this is clearly not the prescription. Live your entire life trying to be sanctified.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Don't wait till you're on death's row. But but this is an amazing story of that last moment of, here is clearly a man whom was raised with some understanding of who the Messiah was, recognizes it, knows he's the judge, knows he's the king of this kingdom that's coming, and does all the right things in his last dying breaths.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and he gets something that you and I may not ever get, which is he
Wow.
gets assured of his actual salvation. He gets
Wow.
assured of, like, here it is, boom, you will be with me in paradise. Like, that's
That's
amazing.
amazing. It really is an amazing story. Yeah. And it's an often leveraged story for various theological arguments, but I feel like the way that we've kind of unpacked it here is probably the truer sense of what's trying to be communicated there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so good, brother. Well, we're bumping up on our time. We have about 20 minutes here. We've covered a lot of things. I think the only things that we haven't covered really yet are a little bit more detail about the God having a physical body, um, and then the two questions that followers of the experience submitted for us to talk about. So let's go ahead and knock out the God has a body thing. Tell me more about that. So, real quick, I've heard arguments about this. Of course, I just kind of inherited the whole like God is a spirit and therefore he's not physical in any sense. Like there's no like he doesn't have a body, right? That's the one of the key things that that's meant to mean. And of course, the numerous texts in the scriptures that talk about God in ways where you could very easily infer that he does have a body of some kind, it's always presented as quote unquote anthropomorphizations, right? Oh, we're just talking about God in a way that humans would understand, but we don't literally mean he has hands or he has feet or anything like that. So, yeah, go ahead. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah. Genesis 1:26, we're made in not just the image but also the likeness of God.
Hmm.
Yep. That's a word that means form and fashion.
Mm.
Um, and we see that same word being used, in Genesis 5 when it talks about Adam, being made in his own likeness. He made
Mm.
Adam in the own likeness of God. It's repeated in Genesis 5. So then you've got a ton of other places. I mean, was it James 3, verse 7 or 8 or 9? I can't remember. It talks about we've been made in God's likeness.
Mm.
You know, um, so a lot of people struggle because they want to bring up stuff like Colossians 1 and 1 Timothy 6. It talks about the invisible God,
Yeah.
right? what, again, in the context of the Bible, where we live in the firmament structure and we actually know where God is and the throne of the Almighty
Ah.
is,
So cosmology is key here for is what you're about to say. Yeah.
where it's he's that word in the Greek, by the way, I can't remember the exact term for invisible, but it's a word that just can mean unseen. It doesn't mean non-corporeal or immaterial. It just means
Mm.
like unseen, right?
Hmm.
We can't see to that level of the firmament because there's a
Oh,
bunch of stuff in the way.
that's a really good point. Like I've always just thought about that. He's the invisible God. In other words, he it's not um in other
You're you're
words,
you're assuming a Platonic definition.
yes, assuming a Platonic definition of like he just can't possibly ever be seen.
Yeah, that's not what the Bible says, because it also uses that same word like in Romans 1 and in Hebrews 11 when it's talking about where I say in Romans 1, I think it's 19 or 20, talking about for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, as that his divine nature, those have clearly been seen through what it's made. So it's talking about his invisible attributes. Well, what are we talking about here? His invisible attributes. So people think, all right, well, because invisible attributes and it says invisible God, but I'm sitting there going, it's saying that those invisible attributes are seen through what's been made.
True.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
plus we have to ask why can't he be seen? And that's the point you were really getting to with cosmology. So for example,
yeah,
First Timothy 6 talks about the one who dwells in unapproachable light, who is not seen nor can be seen. Okay, but is he making a kind of like categorical universal, it's not possible to see God at all ever? Or is he noting that he cannot be seen for a specific reason? And that's where you're getting into, the
yeah. Well,
relevance
Jesus,
of biblical cosmology.
yeah, Christ tells us he can be seen though, and it's
Mm,
Matthew 18:10. It talks about the angels in heaven see the face of my Father.
exactly. Yep.
So yeah, he can be seen, just not by mankind because we're on the earth and he's in the highest heaven. So where the angels minister to him in the highest heaven, they see the face of the Father. They can see him.
Mm,
They walk inside of it. So I love Enoch 70 and 71 because it talks about the ministered angels walking inside the actual house of God where he
mm,
is, right?
got
And
it.
that's, we also see a ton of other passages in scripture that don't make any sense if God the Almighty doesn't actually have a form that can be seen, like the Exodus 33 moment, where Moses is hidden in the cleft of the rock and he only gets to see the back of God, but not his face.
Yeah, what does that mean if not for
So
some form?
whose
Yeah,
back is that?
right.
Right. So now I know there's other passages like people say, well, that's poetic language. It's just speaking, about facets of God's power being seen, like in the Psalms. I think it's Psalm 11. It talks about the Lord's in his holy temple and his eyes are watching closely on mankind. What I mean? And people will say, well, it's not actually his eyes. It's just, he knows all things. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. He's ever all omnipresent, so he can know all things. Like they implore these Greek philosophic ideals
Mm,
into the interpretation of that. Where I'm sitting
yeah.
there going, have you
Or
ever
yeah.
looked at an actual magnifying glass that's shaped like a dome?
Hmm.
It magnifies everything. Now he's got 7 of those stacked on top of each other.
Oh, wow. As Tobias Funke in Rest Development says, you're blowing my mind, Frank. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. I've never thought about it that way.
Also in First Enoch and other, I want to say even in Ezekiel, it or no Jeremiah, um, it references the angels as the eyes of the Lord that go throughout the earth
Hmm.
and are watching everything,
Hmm.
right? And so,
Yeah, kind of like we
yes,
say, even our language, kind of like we say, "You're my eyes and ears," you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, he's the top authority. He's got his ministering servants sent out to take notes on the creation, help people when needed, judge people
Mm,
when needed, and so yeah, that's a common usage there. But we already know that they report back to him. That's the point.
exactly. Job 1.
They're not reporting back to a immaterial energy substance that they can't even see. Like, what?
Right.
So let's just walk through it logically for a minute. If he
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have a corporeal form, what is he?
Something you can't understand, Sean. No,
He's
that's a
beyond anything that you'll
yeah,
experience or know. He's the all omnipotent. He's beyond heavens can't contain him. I'm like, so I debated Anthony Rogers just as a guy on
yeah, I
YouTube
saw
that's
that.
a very vitriolic and a person that I still hold to this day is a man that I do not believe should be a pastor.
Mm,
Um, and he just all the rhetoric, all the bravado of oh God is so great, he's so amazing, he's so powerful, and how could you possibly confine him to a body? But really, all you're doing is you're running up against classical theism. You're running up against Neoplatonism, the idea that God is not parts, God is not
Right.
be confined to anything, that He's immaterial, incorporeal. But pastors like that, they're not going to introduce the concept from that. They're just arguing from that stance. They don't tell you, I'm arguing from Neoplatonism.
They just
They
presume it.
just
Yeah.
do it, right? So it's like you have to unpack a lot of what they're claiming and where they're getting their precepts. And so I believe the scriptures tell us we're made in His likeness,
Hmm.
that He has eyes, ears, back, ahead, like He sees things on the earth. He has he has hands. He holds the scroll in Revelation 5, right?
Hmm.
He has hands. He's sitting on a throne. That means He has a body to sit down.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there that people just skip over. There's multiple times that he says He has a heart. That He loves us
Hmm.
from His heart. That He, I think it's in Isaiah. I can't remember if it's chapter 61 or 62. He's talking about how vengeance was in His heart,
Hmm.
right? So like that means He has thoughts and emotions. So that's where my thoughts and emotions derive. My heart, my mind, inside myself, my body,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And if I'm
Yeah.
made in His likeness, and He's saying He's got emotional capacity and thoughts, both for love and for vengeance inside of Him. I'm like, that's why would He tell us all this language if none of it is comparable? If it's all
Yeah.
just a misdirect, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
struggle with this reinterpretation. He says He has a soul. I think it's Leviticus 26. He says He has a soul.
Hmm.
So does He really have a soul? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what are we talking about? Oh, but He also says it in I think it's Jubilees 1. He says He has a soul as well. Again, I know a lot of people may be still on the fence about Jubilees, but the point is there's consistency in the description of the Father and how He loves us. He
Mm.
wants to dwell among us because He doesn't want to despise us with His soul. He wants to be us well pleasing to Him because that's He appreciates it. He loves us with His heart and soul, just like He commands us. Remember what we talked about at the very beginning. His commandments, Psalm 103, verse 7, they're His ways and deeds.
Exactly.
So the command to love Him with our heart, mind, soul, and strength.
Hmm.
Well, okay. Well, we'll love each other as love yourself. He loves us with His heart, mind, soul, and strength
Mm.
because He has a mind, He has a soul, He has strength,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Mm.
So, like, He has what is it? I mean, He constantly talks about the place of His tabernacle being the place where His feet reside. Does He really have feet? I don't know. Does a body with a robe with hair that's white, Daniel chapter 7, 11 through 13, um, sitting on a throne with a scroll, Revelation 5:1. Does it also have feet?
That's a really good question, and it's also a perfect segue into one of the topics that one of the followers of the Theology Experience wanted us to briefly discuss, which is the question of the pre-existence of Yeshua. Because a lot of theologians throughout history and today would argue that the exact scene you're describing, including all the way back to Moses on in the cleft of the rock, beholding the so-called back of Yahweh, observing the one on the throne with the robes and all that, with the white hair. The one on top of the rakia that Ezekiel sees. Um, all of that's just Yeshua pre-existing his birth. And I happen to know that you hold to a literal pre-existence for Yeshua. You think that before the man Yeshua, the Messiah, existed, the same person, the same being, that was the man Yeshua, existed in a literal way before his birth. But it sounds from what you're saying here that you don't think that the figure that Isaiah saw was Yeshua. You think that was actually the Father. Yeah?
I'm sorry, you're talking about a specific passage, like Isaiah 6?
Isaiah 6, the one you just referenced, where you've got the being with the robe and the white hair,
Oh, I
or
was talking about Daniel 7.
sorry, excuse me. Yeah, I'm getting two things mixed up there. I'm getting the train of his robe filling the temple in Isaiah 6, and then yes, Daniel 7 about the Ancient of Days on the throne with the white hair. But anyway, my point is just to say that I feel like
But
this is a good point to transition to the pre-existence question,
yeah.
because a lot of people will claim that the only way that God was seen, the only way that the Father was ever seen, including in these places you're talking about, was Yeshua, who pre-existed his human existence.
Um, I apologize. I was trying to look up a passage real quick because I think you're presenting an argument that most Trinitarians bring forward, right?
Yeah.
Which is they go to John 12 to lean back on Isaiah 6.
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm just saying that, like, you're talking about how the Father, God the
Mhm.
Father, whom we both agree is a person and a being distinct from Yeshua of Nazareth, Yeshua the Messiah.
Right.
You're talking about how in places in the Old Testament, God the Father is presented as having being seen in some way, as having a physical form in some way, right?
Yes.
And my
It's
point is to
details
say,
for us.
exactly. And my
Yeah.
point is to say that some who hold to the preexistence, the literal preexistence of Yeshua, would say that actually what we're seeing in those cases, or what humans are seeing, is just Yeshua representing the
Right. It's
Father.
the Trinitarian
Right.
Christology, Jesus
So
Christology. Right?
I'm kind of bridging those two topics to see how
Mhm.
you handle that issue.
I don't agree with Trinitarian thought,
Yeah.
and I don't agree with their Christology assumptions. It's all assumptions. I see that Yahweh is the one who descended. It's repeated in the Psalms. The Father is the one that descended. He calls himself a father to Israel in Deuteronomy 32.
Hmm.
He calls himself the Almighty, Deuteronomy 10, 14 through 17. He calls himself the God of gods and Lord of lords. That same Yahweh then says, I'm going to send my servant who will be a covenant for the nations, that I'm my suffering servant. Like, it's not the pre-incarnate son speaking, it's the
Mm.
Almighty.
Mm. Mm.
Okay.
Yep. Got it.
There is no delineation anywhere between Deuteronomy to Isaiah to where it says, oh, by the way, there's another Yahweh talking, right? It's just Yahweh is going to send his servant who becomes a covenant for the peoples, a light to the nations, a suffering servant. Okay.
Right.
So I don't believe in second century Christology
Okay.
uh,
Logos
that
Christology.
that lends into Trinitarian doctrines. I don't believe that, but I also don't understand the Unitarian position on why it'd be such a big deal if Christ did pre-exist.
Mm.
I don't understand it because there are so many passages I feel have to be kind of explained away with the concept of notional pre-existence,
Got
which
it.
I don't see that introduced as a concept in the scriptures. So in the same way, I don't see on the Trinitarian side, I don't see the concept of the homoousios introduced anywhere in describing the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I don't see this idea of notionally existing with the Father. Instead, I see, the big ones, John 17:3. I see, was it John 6? How many times does Jesus say in John 6 that, I come down from heaven? You know,
Yes,
and
and I can understand now, especially with your biblical cosmology firmly in view, how that language would be even more significant to you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's John 6:33. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And then he goes in verse 35, I'm the bread of life.
Hmm.
So he's qualifying himself as this metaphor of bread that came down from heaven. And he says again in verse 38, for I've come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. So I just don't see other prophets speaking like this about themselves.
Yeah, fair
They
enough.
they speak like, oh, they got their genealogy. Yeah, Christ has his genealogy too, but he doesn't refer back to his genealogy as in, oh, I was sent from Nazareth by God. Like, what is the beginning of Isaiah, or yeah, it's the beginning of Isaiah. He talks about his father was Amos, and that he was sent from a specific place to be a prophet to Israel. You just don't see other prophets speaking in this regard. Um,
Yeah, so the question, so first of all, thank you for laying that out. And I understand where you're coming from. The question that was submitted by the follower of the experience actually wanted me to ask you specifically what, and it's kind of already been answered. What you've said so far is you don't really understand, you don't really see how this notion of notional preexistence could be leveraged. But the question specifically was what strengths you see in the alternate perspective. So you hold to a literal preexistence. The questioner was like, what strengths does Sean see? What's the argument that he sees the most from the alternate perspective that he thinks is strongest? That was kind of the question. Is there anything that comes to your mind, or do you just feel like there's really not a lot that you've encountered to date that even starts to challenge what you think about the literal preexistence?
um, yeah, I struggle, man. That's why I'm still
Yeah,
trying to
fair
learn
enough.
the Unitarian arguments. I've had Dr. Dustin Smith on my channel. I've interviewed him.
Hmm.
A guy named Michael Temperato
Yeah.
from Metaphysics Mike. He's a buddy,
Hmm.
and uh, I just I've listened to a lot of their content. I still just don't get it.
Fair
I
enough.
guess, and not just get it that I can't read the scriptures or that I can't understand the concept of notional preexistence. I just don't understand why it matters or how it somehow, what does it violate? Or do you know the arguments well enough to say, like, what would it possibly violate that he actually physically existed in a
Yeah.
spiritual body before he became an earthy body?
Yeah, I think that the main argument from a Unitarian perspective would be that the idea of a literal preexistence for Yeshua would actually would make him not a real human. That's the main idea. And so like him having been a spiritual being before his human existence and then just like becoming a human somehow, that's not the reality of any other human ever. So how is
He
that?
is special, right?
He's very special.
Is
But I think
is it the
that's the
reality that
argument.
any other human didn't sin? Right? So like
That's
he's
a good
clearly
question.
showing himself to be in a kind of a standout amongst mankind, even if he was not pre-existing.
Yeah, here let
So
me. I think that's the kind of theological concern, and let me root it in an exegetical argument. So in Hebrews chapter 2, it talks about um, the Son needing to share in flesh and blood, just like his brothers and sisters share in flesh and blood. Now, a lot of people who present the notion that Jesus is a literally pre-existent being, and that in fact this language right here that I'm pointing to in Hebrews chapter 2 of him sharing in flesh and blood, they would say, see, there you go. There's this being that had to share flesh and blood. It's like, well, hang on, read the next clause. The next clause says he needs to share in it just like his brothers and sisters share in
mhm.
it. Okay? So the same sense in which Jesus shares in flesh and blood is the sense in which all humans share in flesh and blood in Hebrews chapter 2. So yeah, my concern personally is that if he was a pre-existent being, I'm not sure what to make of his humanity
So wait,
exactly.
he couldn't be sharing in true humanity
It,
because he pre-existed
that's the
in a
concern.
spiritual form. Because
That's the concern. Yeah.
because the promise of the resurrection is true humanity gets changed into true spiritual form.
Yes.
So do you maintain yourself in your new body, new mind, new heart?
I'm trying to understand the argument and the relevance here. So,
So you're saying that Jesus,
yep.
I would put forward that Jesus existed in heaven before the world began, like he says in John
Yeah,
17:3,
spiritual being, right? Not a human.
right?
Yep.
And was sent down to the earth. We get some of that description, Philippians 2.
Mhm.
And here, this is where, I get upset with the Unitarian argument because it forces me to sound like a Trinitarian for 2 seconds. And I just don't want to do that. But I got to be honest with the text. I go to Philippians 2 and I see, oh, it's
Understood.
found in the likeness of man.
Mhm.
And I sit here going, okay, 1 Timothy 3, manifested in the flesh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Interesting. That's the language not spoken of any other man who's begat or begotten in the flesh from a
Okay.
human father. We get the story of, obviously the Holy Spirit overshadowed Mary.
Mhm.
Doesn't seem to be that Joseph is his biological father, seems to be special. Um, and so if I'm correct in seeing that the scriptures say he did physically come down from heaven and his spiritual body was removed and then he's given into a fleshly body, an earthy body, as 1 Corinthians 15 calls it.
Mhm.
Um, then at the resurrection, he's 1 Corinthians 15:45, he's back into a life-giving spirit. He's now
Mhm.
a spiritual body
He has
again,
that spiritual body again. Yeah.
right? But he didn't forget all of his disciples' names. He didn't forget Mary's name. He didn't forget who he was while he was here in the flesh. He
Mhm.
didn't forget any of that stuff. He maintained all that information. He's just resurrected into a totally different ontology now.
Mhm.
But his
As we will be,
soul,
right?
as we will be,
Mhm.
and as we will experience, our souls are put into new vessels that live forever. And we remember our life on earth. We're grateful that we are in heaven. Do you think that when you're resurrected and taken to the house of God, that you'll remember your life here on earth?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's that one passage in Revelation that talks about, not remembering certain things. But I couldn't speak to that much more. But anyway,
I th-
continue with your reasoning here.
yeah, I think though every eye, he will wipe every tear from our eye in Revelation
Hmm.
21 is speaking about the gratefulness of being resurrected into the house of God.
Hmm.
You know, I don't
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
I don't think it's because we get resurrected into God's
Uh,
house and we're in pain.
doesn't it say something about not remembering sorrows? I'm forgetting
There'll
off the
be no
top of my head.
death, there'll be no sorrow, that kind of
Sorrow, that's
stuff.
the one. There will be no
Yeah.
sorrow. Yeah. Um,
Inside the kingdom, there's no death. Inside the kingdom, there's no sorrow. It's peace, joy, life
got
everlasting,
it. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
I,
you
I, I'm
but
I'm
you know
happy to
who you
grant.
were.
Yeah, I'm
You know
happy
who
to
you
grant.
were.
I don't think we're
Yeah.
gonna forget everything. Yeah.
Right. So so therefore is it still equally possible that he could have existed in a spiritual form and then now while he's in the flesh, he still remembers that he was with his Father in heaven before the world began.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and as far as the mattering question, why does this
Hmm.
matter? At the end of the day, when it comes to salvation, justification, righteousness before the Father, entrance into the kingdom, presence of the new heavens and the new earth, it's like, yeah, does it really matter what you believe here? No. However, if we're going to talk about the issue, again, I would just say that I think the concern is that
And I want
it
to
puts him
address your
it
Hebrews too.
yeah, it puts them into a category that the scriptures, well, of course, the exegetical argument here is that the scriptures don't put him into this category. So you'd have to engage with all of the passages, Colossians 1, John 1, John 17, Philippians 2, all this stuff.
I, I don't
Yeah.
think Colossians 1 is speaking firstborn as in created for in that regard. I think it's
Sure.
speaking more of a position of authority
Yeah,
over the
just go
church.
go with the passages that you referenced. I think you
Yeah.
said John 17, Philippians 2. My point is just that you're going to have to dig into the exegetical arguments here. But as far as the why does it at the end of the day matter, setting aside the exegetical arguments, I think
It,
the core
that
the
wasn't
core
my I'm sorry, that wasn't my argument though. I just asked what would it violate if he did
yeah.
exist in the spiritual
Yeah,
form?
and what I'm trying to say is I think that the core theological concern from the biblical Unitarians that you're naming, such as Michael Temperato and also myself, I would say, because I do hold to that, would be just the that it seems to threaten in some sense his genuine humanity. Now,
Okay.
you said
Can
you
I
wanted
offer a quick counter?
absolutely, and you said
Okay.
you wanted to talk about Hebrews 2 because as
Mhm.
I noted, Hebrews 2 talks about Jesus sharing in the flesh and blood, just as his brothers and
Mhm.
sisters share in the flesh and blood, seeming
That's right.
seeming to create a a parallel in what it means for them to share in the flesh and blood. My point is to say I don't think there's anything like an incarnation in view there, because if there was an incarnation in view for Jesus sharing in flesh and blood, it would seem to suggest there was for his brothers and sisters. Which, by the way, if you weren't aware, some Jewish tradition thinks that's the case. But go ahead.
So in Hebrews 2, I'm going to grant your argument in Hebrews 2, okay?
Yeah.
That it would make him unique, that he would be considered 100%. We're not doing no hypostatic union around here, but he's considered 100% man
Hmm.
in Hebrews 2, so that he can, uh, you know, it, share in the likeness of mankind and
Hmm.
sympathize with us in our weaknesses. Hebrews 4:15. But in Hebrews 5, it says, verse 1, every high priest is appointed from among men to represent them in matters relating to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices.
Yes.
As it then goes on to continue to express the prophecy in verse 6 that Christ was prophesied to become a high priest forever.
Hmm.
And then we don't see him get his priesthood until after he's resurrected and gets a spiritual body. This is
Okay.
why Hebrews 8:4 says, while on the earth, he couldn't be a priest
Right.
because that office is already given to someone, i.e., the Levites. So while, during his days on the earth, while in the flesh, Hebrews 5, verse 7,
Hmm.
he cried out with loud cries to the one who could save him, right? Through his obedience. He learned through his suffering, he learned obedience, and then made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being
Yes.
made high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So
Hmm.
after death and resurrection, he's made a high priest. But yet here we have the writer of Hebrews in verse 5, verse 1 saying, well, a high priest is chosen from amongst men in things
Yes.
pertaining matters relating to God. But yet he's left the flesh, he's glorified in a new ontology, and then he's given his high priesthood there. So
Right.
I don't see an issue with, so if you're going to take an issue with Hebrews 2 to say, how could he be incarnated into the flesh of mankind and spend his days in the earthly flesh, and therefore it's somehow not truly man,
Hmm.
where in chapter 5 he's being chosen to represent man even though he's spiritual nature now. Because here's the difference. Resurrected man is a new creation, as
Right.
Paul
It's a
teaches.
spiritual body, right?
It is a spiritual body, but it's
Yep.
unique.
Hmm.
It's unique. The angels don't get resurrection. The unclean spirits don't get resurrection.
Hmm.
This is a unique concept where the, like as he tries to explain in 1 Corinthians 15, what's sown in the earth as earthy is raised spiritual. What's sown as mortal is raised immortal.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? Okay. So the storyline for mankind has always been your God is offering you a totally different ontology,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
right?
Going
So
from mortal to immortal. Now, here's the thing is that and again, this is just going to have to require it. I'm not saying we do this now, but I'm just noting that We're going to have to get into the exegetical weeds on various passages to discuss this, but the supposition with regard to Jesus, of course, is that not only has he gone from mortal to immortal as the first fruits of the resurrection, but before that, he went from immortal to mortal, right?
That's
Um,
right.
and I think that that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the sticking point is
Yeah,
from our
but
perspective.
no, I get it. That's what I'm trying to address it, which is how is it any different to go from mortal to immortal?
Hmm.
I would say it's. I mean, so let's keep in mind the lake of fire that the immortal body can be destroyed.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
we when we use the word immortal,
Wait,
we're
wait,
not.
wait. Sorry, hold on. The immortal body can be destroyed. I'm sorry. No, I don't think that um I don't think
This
that the
is
wicked
this
are
is
I don't think that the wicked are resurrected to immortality.
no. This is the foundation. Then okay, so the angels, do they have immortal bodies?
I would say they have spiritual bodies, but they're not going to have eternal life, which I think is what determines. Well, okay, the
If
righteous
if
angels,
Satan
yes.
if Satan's
Sorry.
not thrown in the lake of fire, will he continue to live?
Ooh, good question. Yes.
So the lake of fire is the only thing that can kill the angelic body.
Yes, yes. Okay, there you go. So they
They
have
can't be drowned. They can't be
right.
stabbed.
Okay.
They can't
So
be
got
burned.
it. Sure. So in that sense, they have bodies that unless God destroys them, which he can, they would be they would have eternal life. Yes, go.
Okay, because that's what the definition of a immortal body is. Immortality
Okay. Okay.
is not that you cannot be killed. It's that you are in a position where you can live forever because your body can live forever. But if you rebel, the Father has a place for you too.
Yeah, he can destroy you.
Right? He can destroy you like a fire, body, and soul. Matthew 10:28.
Okay. So what's
Revelation
the
Revelation
so,
20.
yep, got it. So I'm with you now. So
Okay. So it
what's the
seems to be
key?
the ontological stumbling block. It seems to be
Hmm.
is that you guys are thinking that the ontology of a spiritual body that Christ has to quote unquote derobe to put on the earthy body, that somehow can't be derobed, but it can. Because it's
I
not just because the Son of God may exist in an immortal body in heaven above, doesn't mean that that can't be changed, because we see those immortal bodies can be affected even to the point of being destroyed by the Father.
gotcha.
So when
Yeah.
Christ resurrected, did he get in my, like, if you were playing the devil's advocate from my view, or steel man in
Sure.
my view, when
Yeah.
Christ resurrected into his new spiritual body, did he receive the old spiritual body he had before he came to the earth?
Ooh, really good question. I would say no.
No, because remember he shows
No.
scars.
Right.
They recognize his
It's
face.
it's the body that's like a seed, planted
Yeah,
immortal, but then it's sprouts immortal. They're connected in a very fundamental way.
because the soul, which collects your experiences, your mind, will, and your emotion, the things you'll be judged by, that carries through.
Mm,
What does Christ tell us in Matthew 10:28? The body and soul is destroyed in Gehenna.
got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm happy to grant the logical possibility, the theological possibility of that. Again, it's just going to come down to exegeting various texts like John 17 and Philippians 2, but I don't want to derail the conversation too long because it'd take too long. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you this, I'd love to have you back on a part two for this. All of my guests that I have on the Theology Experience, I hope will come back multiple times. So maybe we can bookmark that and talk a little bit more in depth about that another time.
Yeah.
But I hope that the questioner was satisfied with our discussion here as a brief answer to their question.
Oh, and lastly, we don't
Yep.
teach polygyny. We believe that it is allowed per the law, but we believe it's a very bad idea, and that especially in a society not governed by the elders and the law of Israel, I believe
Mm,
polygyny is a very bad idea. And so I would highly discourage men. I would think we have a precedent set: one man, one woman. Christ repeats this in Matthew 19, and I think that there's allowances depending on circumstances within the law, but I think the general precedent that the Father set forth for us is Adam and Eve, and that's it. So,
gotcha. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I was going to ask you that because that was the last question, or that was the other question I should say, and the last question I wanted to ask you from a listener was like, "Hey, make sure to ask him about this because," and what he specifically said. And I don't know how much time you have left, but maybe we could talk for a few more minutes. But what he wanted was us to have a conversation about it from both of our disparate perspectives, because just card on the table, I do think that it's both permissible and that if people today want to pursue it, they can. They do need to use the wisdom of God, of course. And that particular thing you just mentioned there about constraints on what the wisdom would suggest for us is maybe where we could talk. But he wanted to have us talk because he sees this topic discussed and it's very vitriolic back and forth. You know, there's some people
Yeah.
that are like, oh, it's just sin and you're a sinner and God's going to condemn you if you do it. And then other people are like, no, you're going to get condemned if you tell me I can't, type thing. So, no, your perspective is interesting. My question for you, with what you just said, and I'm going to summarize what you said and then ask you a follow on. So, essentially, you do recognize that the law of God permits it. Number one.
Mhm.
However, number two,
And in some cases encourages it, like with
yeah, yeah,
the brother who dies, and the no children to the sister-in-law.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's that. But then number two, your point is that it's probably not wise for men and women to construct households in that way today, because there's no Torah prescribed rulership governing us right now. So
Mhm.
in other words, we don't
You
have.
would be eaten alive in the American legal system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're in a legal system that is technically opposed to that. Like it's
Yeah.
illegal in on all 50 states, I believe.
Yeah. And no, I just mean just the moment one of your wives wants to divorce you and you can't stop her, and she wants to take half with her quattro, and then she wants
Mm.
to get child support because of the, I mean, it's going to get nasty and messy,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all those those other wives and those other children are going to be greatly affected and hindered.
Yeah, which is why some of the people that I'm familiar with in the pro polygyny practicing movement in America have developed a lot of kind of under the ground techniques to try to avoid all that. But yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess here's my question for you though on that. Um, I guess it's kind of already answered because of what you just said about the governing structures. But what I was going to ask you is if you thought that this is how it worked in the apostolic days. Because in the apostolic days, it seems to me that there absolutely were polygynous households that were in the church. Like
Wasn't
there
that
was no.
also more? You're talking about like after Christ's ascension?
Yeah, I'm talking about in
Yeah.
the New Testament. Like we can
Yeah.
read and we can see that there were polygynous households.
But wasn't they're also living under Roman rule amongst other nations, which
Yeah.
also allowed for this as well. They didn't have any strict laws. I mean, you already had the Jews in those days allowing Jewish men to just put away their wife without a certificate of divorce
Hmm.
and disrupt the whole family and
Mm.
be disadvantageous to the woman and
Yeah.
like live outside the law anyway. So like
Hmm.
that's within Israel. But then you go into Roman society and like I don't think they had an issue with it, did they?
Roman society absolutely did. This is something that I would recommend looking into a little bit further for you for some context historically. Roman society, I think, is actually where American society got its monogamy mandate.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I would just suggest looking at that historically. It wasn't until like the 1000s that the Jewish uh, tradition started insisting on monogamy. The Christian tradition was earlier. It was like it was kind of, it's funny how simultaneously it is with a lot of the theological issues that we're going to disagree with the Christian tradition about, because it was like in the 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s where monogamy started to become enforced. But I take your point, and my last guest, Matthew Jansen, no, two guests ago, again, a friend of ours who's come up a couple times. He has some material about this where he talks about it, and his basic take is like, yes, God allows it. There's nothing wrong with a man or a woman pursuing it, but you need the wisdom of God. And I feel like your
I,
perspective here is just an extension of that. You're basically just saying like, hey, we need wisdom, and from your perspective, our current society is just not conducive to it. That's what I'm hearing.
is Adam and Eve being made one wife for Adam, is that the wisdom of God on display?
Yeah, I just don't think that that's prescriptive as far as how many wives Adam could ever have.
Did he have more than one?
When I say Adam, I should clarify. I mean men
Sure.
further.
So
Sorry.
I guess the logic I implore with this idea
Yeah.
is the commission for Adam and Eve was to fill the earth. Sure would have been a lot easier if you had a bunch of wives.
Sure. Yeah, I mean you only need one, right, to populate. I mean a one woman can birth a lot of babies. So,
Well, sure. And then they lived to
yeah.
900 plus years. We get it.
Exactly.
They had,
Exactly.
many sons and daughters, as it says, but you could have many, 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 many more if you had
Sure
all
can.
harem,
If you're
right?
true,
So,
true.
so it's interesting that we don't see him take another wife. and all that time that he had, 900 years to make that decision. He never did it. So I feel like there's a huge precedent there. I understand the social protections for the woman to be a second wife or a concubine, and we see that that played out furthering in the scriptures in Genesis and other places. But
Mhm.
I just feel like there's clearly in the Torah, it's like, hey, if you're, do not disparage your second wife, make sure she gets all of her marital rights as well, that kind of thing. So they're supposed to be treated equally with love. Where I do think it's a problem in the modern day is that I do think that uh, you should be very like the wife should be on board with that before you get married.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. That's also
Because
what Matthew
what
Jansen points out. Yeah.
yeah, I think that it runs very close to adultery if you're pressing for another woman in the relationship, and the wife is against it. That's not what she was brought into. That's not what she understood. There is no dead brother-in-law situation. That's just simply you want another wife for what reason? I think that it's a detrimental to your first wife.
Can
Um,
I want to point something out to you real quick here, since we're just gonna, we're having an open, free
mhm.
conversation. I hear what you're saying, and I see the wisdom in it. However, I do think it's important to note that in the scriptures, God is portrayed as the husband of Israel and Judah. And I think that part of and first of all, they're construed as two different wives, by the way, in the prophets. But that aside, I think that a huge part of the biblical story is actually the notion of Israel as God's wife, having the Gentiles brought into the picture, and Israel really not being happy about it, if you hadn't noticed. So my point is to say, like, I
Yeah, but
hear
what
what you're,
happens when the Gentile gets brought in, though?
I hear what do you mean?
So when that Gentile converts to worshiping Yahweh, they're
Yeah.
they're the wife. They're the first wife now.
Wait, what?
So
The
because there's
Gentiles, the
one
first
there's
wife?
like we were talking about earlier, there's there's no Jew or Greek, right? There is no like Uriah the Hittite. He's a part of Israel. He's living in the land of Judah. He's fighting for the army of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Mm-hmm.
he's an Israelite.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're
He's
saying
a
that the
part of the first
Gentiles.
wife.
So okay. So this is going to be a theological point that we'll have to dig into a little bit more. But clarify if I'm misunderstanding you. You're saying that those Gentiles who come in are actually Israelites?
Are they not?
I don't think so.
You don't
Um,
think that the Egyptian father in Leviticus 25 was grafted in?
well, grafted in, I just don't think that means becomes an Israelite. I think that it means that they're now part of the covenant family, but
Are you
they remain
appealing
Gentiles.
to like rabbinic standards of the Gur?
No, I think that this can be found. Well, I think that there's certain elements of the rabbinic treatment of that issue that are relevant, but I think that this can be seen in the scriptures too. I mean, uh, it's a rabbit trail. I don't know how deep and how far we want to go into it, but I will just
So do,
note that for
what about
me,
real quick though?
yeah.
What happened to the people that grafted into Israel in ancient days? Um, where did they go? Where like
Well, so there's Gentiles. So what I think's happening is that you're conflating Paul's notion of being grafted into with becoming a Jew through proselyte circumcision. Those aren't the same thing.
no,
Like,
I'm not. No, I'm talking about
okay,
anyone that would have grafted in before the days of Christ, before
yep,
Paul was on the scene. Anyone that grafts into Israel and say the days of Ezekiel.
sure.
What does he go to the land of Gad, Issachar, Naphtali, Manasseh, east side, west side? Which
Well,
where
where
does he
he
go?
lives does not where he lives within the land of Israel. He can be in the midst of Israel, which is, by the way, the language that's used
Uh-huh.
both in the Torah and also in Acts 15. These Gentiles, those of the nations, they dwell in the midst of Israel. They don't become Israel.
Did Rahab become Israel?
Well, she's a woman who I think essentially is viewed as having converted, having proselytized to the nation.
Right.
I couldn't speak much into the case of Rahab, but what I could give you an
So
example
was
of is
Uriah, was he a Judite?
Uriah the Hittite. Um, I'm not sure, but here, let me just we can talk specific examples, and if there's something that you have that's relevant to these particular cases you're bringing up that would suggest something relevant, let me know. But what I'm trying to say here is this: I think that the picture in the Torah and the prophets and in the New Testament is that there's different categories. There's the Israelites; those are the physically descended from Jacob, who males who are circumcised on the eighth day or as an adult. There's women who are under the headship of some man, uh, and therefore have Israelite identity. But then there's those of the nations who are circumcised and become Israelites through that circumcision process. And then there's another category of people who do not become circumcised, do not become Israelites, but they dwell among
I'm not talking about
Israel.
them. I'm talking about those who become Israelites because they worship in the God of Yahweh. They get circumcised to take part in Passover, the
Right.
covenant feast of Yahweh.
Yeah, there's those three categories,
Yeah,
right? There's
I'm not talking about the foreigner that dwells in the land but doesn't want to worship Yahweh. I'm talking about those who graft into Israel because they're Israelites and they were not born from the line of Jacob. So they're Israelites and they're given an inheritance in
I
the
would say
land.
those people are Israelites, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. But
Because
I don't think
otherwise they're not the other people that the third category you mentioned are not grafted in.
it, okay, so they dwell in the midst of Israel and
Mm-hmm.
they're full members of the covenant. They're
Are
not
they?
Israelites. I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Those
they can't partake in the covenant festival of Passover.
well, they can't eat the lamb unless they become circumcised, but that doesn't mean they can't partake in the Passover at all. They can't eat the Passover lamb. Yes, that doesn't mean they can't.
Is the Passover an eternal ordinance for all of Israel?
Yes.
Okay. Should
Yes.
we observe the Passover if we have faith in Christ, who's the greatest prophet of Israel?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I just don't think
So
that I just don't think that
so
the
the high
nations.
priest, the high
Mhm.
priest and prophet Christ, there was a high priest and prophet of the Aaronic order back in the day, right? Take a
Mhm.
Zadokite. So they're the high priest and prophet of that day, and someone grafts in, they would have to appeal to the authority of that high priest and prophet, or whomever the other prophets of Israel are that were righteous. They want to become they have to abide by those laws, whether foreign born or native born. The law is to observe Passover,
Mhm.
right? So
Oh,
people that are foreign born, abiding in the land, they are instructed and encouraged to abide by the laws of the land,
they're
which
not
one of them is the
required.
eternal ordinance of Passover.
I see what you're saying. Well, I would say that it's required of those descendants of Jacob or those who proselytize to through circumcision to become an Israelite. They are commanded uh, to do that. But I don't think that the Gentiles who nevertheless dwell in the midst of Israel and are members of the covenant, expected to be obedient to the law. Um, I don't
So
think
what can
those
they do?
people.
Can they worship Baal in the land?
Of course not.
Okay, then what do they do? They all worship somebody back then.
Yeah, they worship the God of Israel. Absolutely. They just don't have
Okay,
to
how did
become
they do that?
circumcised.
Circumcision, people were considered part of the God of Israel without being circumcised for
Yeah,
40 years in the wilderness. They didn't circumcise that next generation until Joshua.
right. They were, yeah, those descendants of Jacob that had not been circumcised needed to be circumcised in order to be
God
faithful to the covenant.
God parted the Jordan River on behalf of those uncircumcised people before they got circumcised.
Right.
Okay, but they were part of Israel.
Well, yes, they
They were willing to be under the authority of the high priests and under Joshua and to follow the promises of God to go into the promised land. Therefore, their fathers disobedient died in the wilderness,
yep.
and this new generation uncircumcised
Hmm.
now need to be circumcised.
Needed to be circumcised, and if they wouldn't have been circumcised, then they would have been cut off from among their people.
But they weren't cut off for 40 years.
Right, because it's a process, right? It's a journey, and God's merciful, but He knows that. I mean, at a certain point, they were circumcised because they needed to be circumcised, and it's explicit both
But
in Genesis,
they weren't on the eighth day, though, is what I'm saying.
right?
Neither was Gershom.
Right. Yes. No, circumcision doesn't have to be on the eighth day in order for you to be an Israelite. That is when it's supposed to happen,
Mm-hmm.
but it can happen as an adult. That's what for both a descendant of Jacob and a non-Israelite. No, for both a descendant of Jacob and someone who's not a descendant of Jacob, you can get circumcised as an adult and still be reckoned among your people.
Right. I
But
don't
if
think.
you
I guess what I'm trying to lovingly insert here is I don't think circumcision is the boundary line there.
of who is and isn't Israelite,
Yeah, I think it's like Paul tries to express. It's the circumcision of the heart. There's some outer commandments that will be done in due time, some later than others.
yeah,
But in ancient Israel, if you're living in the land under the governance of the elders and the priesthood of Israel, you can't be worshiping Baal. Otherwise, you're contrary
yeah,
to the prophets of Israel. You're contrary to the commandments of God, to the throne of the Almighty. You're profaning His throne.
yeah,
Deuteronomy 11, that's you're worshiping in the ways of the nations. So they wouldn't have allowed that.
right,
So then, if they didn't want to convert to Israel, then what are they? They're just a godless people that just are hanging out. I don't think there was any atheists in the ancient world.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm just saying again, there's three different categories, and I'm not suggesting that the Gentiles who did not get circumcised, who were in the midst of Israel, were just pagans. No, they were worshiping the God of Israel. This is what I think is
Okay.
at key issue in Acts 15 is, but I think I think it goes to show actually what I said earlier that you seem to deny, which is that you do conflate grafting in with circumcision, don't you?
No, I just said you can be grafted into the vine of Israel, but not yet be circumcised. It's a matter of the heart, right?
Yes.
Circumcision,
Okay. What
circumcision
am I
was
thinking
given.
then?
Circumcision was given decades after Abraham followed God.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So he'd been walking with God, God doing miracles on his behalf. He's called a prophet of God, later he's considered a prophet of God in Genesis 20. But like he's the people of the land knew him as a prophet, and he had been walking with God for
Wait. This is okay. Now
decades.
I'm realizing what I'm thinking. So you said earlier that the command for non-Israelites in the land was to observe Passover, which requires them to be circumcised.
To observe all the feasts of God.
And you said that those who were not, um, who did not do that were not grafted in.
Yeah, because they're not observing the feasts of God. They're
So
not
how,
going to honor. They're not presenting themselves three times a year to Yahweh. So what are
I
they
guess
doing?
that's where I'm getting the circumcision grafting in connection. So you're saying that Gentiles in the midst of Israel who did not get circumcised were not grafted in.
Yes, in a general sense, but specifically Zechariah 14, when it talks about tabernacles, those who refuse to partake in it, they don't get any rain. That is the Leviticus 26. That is the penalty of rejecting Yahweh is you get famine, lack of rain.
Right? But I
So
don't but but what about the uncircumcised in Isaiah 56 who is pleasing to the Lord because he keeps his covenant and observes
yeah,
Sabbath and all that, who's not circumcised?
again, like I say, there's the circumcision is not entryway into the faith. It's a sign that you're already in covenant with Yahweh
So you can
after
be
the
gra
fact.
so you can be okay, so what you're saying is that
Judaism said it's an entryway in the faith, but Yahweh did not.
so what you're saying is that Gentiles can can be grafted in without being circumcised, but ultimately they must be circumcised. That's the point.
That's encouraged if you want to participate in the feast of God, which you're instructed to do as part of your discipleship, specifically Passover. Right.
Okay, got it. Well, so
It's
let's
it's also considered a sign of the covenant, just like Sabbath is. So like just like they got to learn how to do Sabbath over time as a sign of the covenant,
hmm, okay.
right?
So
So
so the
was it Titus that got circumcised?
Timothy.
Timothy. How
Yeah.
long did he walk with Paul before he got circumcised?
Um, I'm not sure, but the reason Timothy was circumcised was because uh he was a Jew. He was an Israelite.
So why did he already have? Why wasn't he already circumcised?
I should say he was a descendant of Jacob who should be circumcised or be cut off from among his people, as the Torah says. That's why he was circumcised.
Why didn't Paul circumcise him immediately? Why did he wait?
I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Because
I
it's not the sign. It's a sign that you're already in covenant. It doesn't bring you into covenant with God. Your
okay.
circumcised heart does. Your repentant circumcised heart does, right?
Yeah, I think that Romans, you're doing Romans 2, the end of Romans 2, where essentially the point seems to me that circumcision alone does not guarantee your Jewish identity. It's circumcision of the flesh and circumcision of the heart that guarantees your Jewish identity. But we're a bit down the weeds of the original point. The point, it's funny that we went off this direction, but I see why you think it's relevant. My point was to say that um, a key theme in in the scriptures is that the first bride of the father is not exactly
Mhm.
happy that he's bringing another bride into the picture.
In
Okay.
Jeremiah 31, when he says, "I took you out of Egypt and held you by the hand, I was like a husband to you,"
Mhm.
right? That wasn't two houses, that was one. When he gives himself in metaphoric fashion to say he was like a husband to them when he brought them out of the Egypt by the hand, that they were not split into two houses yet. Now I grant you Isaiah 50, Jeremiah 3, two
Mhm.
different certificates of divorce he gives to different houses.
Yep.
But I'm seeing this metaphor of him calling himself like a husband to the Israelites when they were still just one people coming out of Egypt.
Yeah,
So
I think the ultimate. So we can kind of get into the theological and exegetical weeds about all this stuff. I want to avoid that briefly, but I think the point
I was
that
sorry, I was just trying to address your direct point though.
no, I'm not. I'm not accusing. I'm not saying that you've done anything wrong. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to meet the listener's request without taking too long.
Well, that's a
Which,
big topic.
yeah, exactly. Which is, I think,
I personally, just to try to jump
yep.
to the end, I personally don't think that this covenant analogy relates to the individual relationships between two wives and one man.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, because God
Um,
doesn't truly marry anybody. That's a metaphor, right?
it is a metaphor. Yeah, it is a metaphor. I think that we do have an example of exactly what he's talking about in
It,
Rachel and Leah, though.
God didn't truly give a certificate of divorce. It's a metaphor for him scattering them from the land.
Of course, yeah, of
Okay.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's symbolic.
Right.
I do think that the point though I'm trying to make is in
So
response to
that's
you is that it does apply in certain it can apply in certain scenarios, like for example with Rachel and Leah.
right. Tricked, still wanted Rachel, married Rachel, right?
Right.
Tricked into marrying Leah. Now, this is actually where I do love Jubilees because it tells you after Rachel died that Jacob loved Leah with all his heart. So it's like she wasn't the, second
Oh,
class wife.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, it says that he did truly love her with all his heart. And and I think that's cool. I
yeah,
think
that's
Jacob was a righteous man. You know
I
what I
do
mean?
too. Yeah,
He abided in the Torah, not showing favoritism to one of his two wives, right?
right. That's what he was supposed to do. Yeah,
Right. I think it's a beautiful thing. So,
yeah.
like I said, Bible allows it. I don't think it's wise in this day and age, especially in the United States with our marriage laws. I don't think it's wise at all.
Fair
But
enough.
if you want that type of trouble, that's up to you. Mo wise, mo trouble. You know.
Well, and whatever you do, I mean, your key point is exactly what Matthew said, and I think that it really resonates well, which is that you need wisdom, and this is not something that you should be rushing into and causing chaos and problems with, which
Yeah.
that happens. So
And to any
appreciate
man
the
listening out there, I would highly say if you do not get this, and you're not in agreement on this topic before you get married, it's
mm,
you may try to marry a second one, but end up only having one at the end of the day. This is not you. The wife is not going to take it as and modern day women will not take this as an easy thing. So just be very wise, be very communicative, be very open with those women, let them know because their hearts are very delicate and tender. So
that's yeah, there's wisdom there. And from a
it's interesting that you say Rachel and Leah because in that story, as it unfolds with Laban, they actually come to despise their father because he's squandered their wealth and they don't seem to trust his leadership anymore as the patriarch. And they
right,
don't to the point where she's stealing his gods and disrespecting him like that and lying to him. And
they
like
respect
there's,
Jacob, but
but they
not him.
respected Jacob, right? So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, it's an interesting dichotomy as far as like they're choosing who's going to be the new man in our life,
Hmm.
our father or this Jacob guy. Well, Jacob actually is acting better than our father. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
so they respected him like that. And culturally, they kind of, couldn't, sadly, they couldn't, I don't know if they could say much about both being given to him. You know what I mean? But
Oh, right, because it was I mean, it's generally,
yeah,
even in the Torah, it's basically the father's parents arranging it. However, I do think in the Torah, uh, women have the right of consent or
they
rejection.
do. They
However you
do.
put it. In the Torah, they have the right of rejection.
Deuteronomy
So,
22. And that's what
yeah,
I'm getting at
yeah.
is because if you're trying to, in this modern age, find a wife, and then 5 years later, you want to marry another wife, and that first
Mhm.
wife never even knew that this was going to be part of the deal, does she get any right of rejection? Does she get any right of consent to say, "Ooh, I don't know about this. This seems like a hasty vow at this point." You know what I mean?
That's a good question. I think we need to, as brothers, I'm not saying you and me right now, but I think as brothers that are trying to walk in faithfulness to the Torah, but also be good stewards of what we have in our lives, including our wives, for goodness sake, whom Peter tells us that we're supposed to treat honorably as the weaker vessel and so on. Like we need to have an open conversation about that. Does a man have a right to do that? I know that in circles I've swam in, the basic answer is yeah. You're the patriarch. You're the king. The queens don't get to tell you how many queens you can have and when you can bring a new one into the picture. But I hear what you're saying. I hear the point of being wise and being careful, and that verse um, that I just alluded to, 1 Peter 3:7, seems like it's highly relevant here. Like you said earlier, um, women need to be treated with honor. They need to be respected. They need to be treated carefully because they can be harmed very easily.
And they
That's
can harm you
and they can harm you too.
legally forever, financially forever. This is why I say specifically in this country. Maybe if you were in some other country, with a different cultural perspective, but like in the modern day, trying to integrate this concept of Torah into the American culture, bro, I wouldn't try it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that
So
the listener's question has been answered, and we have We have gone on for 3.5 hours. This has been excellent, Sean. Thank you
Yeah,
so
man.
much.
You're a joy to talk to.
Thanks, brother. Same to you. I hope we get to do this many more times. And so I guess we'll go ahead and end it here. May God bless you and your household today.
You too, brother. Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.